This is an emergency broadcast from Eldermore Village. A ledger has been found, bound in leather, older than the church itself. Every name written inside it eventually disappears. Do not read it after midnight. Do not open it when the fog returns. The Widow's Ledger is no ordinary book. It writes back. Emergency alert. Do not read the ledger after midnight.
The fog hung thick and heavy over Eldermore as Detective Inspector Elara Vorse's car wound its way down the narrow, twisting lane that led into the village. The world beyond the windshield was a blur of muted shapes and greys. The landscape swallowed by the mist, as if the village itself had been swallowed whole by an unseen hand. Elara's fingers tightened on the steering wheel, a faint chill crawling down her spine, not from the cold, but from the sense that something was profoundly off about this place. Eldermore was not marked on many maps, a forgotten pocket of England tucked away behind ancient hills and dense woods. But the recent discovery in the home of Evelyn Harper, a widow who had died quietly in her sleep, had drawn Elara here. The ledger found among Evelyn's possessions was unlike any she had seen. A cryptic, leather-bound book filled with entries of inheritances and strange, coded annotations that suggested more than mere financial records. It was whispered among the locals that the ledger held the key to a mystery spanning centuries, but no one had dared to uncover the truth until now. Pulling into the village square, Elara's eyes darted across the scene. The cottages, weathered and moss-covered, clustered tightly together beneath the heavy boughs of towering oaks. Not a soul was in sight. The village unusually silent except for the muffled drip of condensation from eaves and the distant echo of a church bell tolling somewhere beyond the fog. She stepped out of the car, the damp air clinging to her coat as she pulled the collar up against the chill. Her first destination was Evelyn Harper's cottage, a modest stone structure at the edge of the village. The door creaked open under Ilara's hand, revealing a dim interior filled with the scent of old wood and fading memories. Sunlight filtered weakly through curtained windows, casting soft patterns on the dust-covered floorboards. On a small table near the hearth lay the widow's ledger, its leather cover cracked and worn, the gold embossing faded but still legible. Elara's gaze lingered on the book, her fingers itching to open it, but she resisted. First, she needed to understand the people who called Eldermore home. Stepping back outside, she began to make her way through the village, her sharp eyes taking note of every detail. It was then she noticed something peculiar. No one she passed appeared older than 40. Children played, yes, but the adults, from shopkeepers to farmers, all carried the same ageless quality. Faces were smooth, eyes bright, bodies unmarked by time's usual wear. She approached the blacksmith's forge, where the clang of hammer on anvil echoed through the mist. James Marlowe, a burly man with soot-streaked skin and calloused hands, looked up as she drew near. His eyes, however, held a wariness that made Elara's skin prickle. "You're the inspector, aren't you?" he asked, voice gruff but controlled. Elara nodded, offering a professional smile. "Detective Inspector Elara Voss. I'm here about the ledger and Evelyn Harper's passing." James wiped sweat from his brow, studying her with an intensity that suggested suspicion. Evelyn was part of Eldermore's history, same as the rest of us. Not sure outsiders understand the way things work here. "That's why I'm here," Elara replied steadily. "To understand." Their brief exchange was interrupted by the sudden appearance of a group of villagers emerging from the mist, their movements almost too smooth, their expressions carefully measured. Ilara observed them closely, noting the sameness in their appearances and the guarded smiles that never quite reached their eyes. As the day wore on, Ilara conducted interviews with several residents, each offering fragments of the village's past, though inconsistencies soon emerged. Stories shifted depending on who she spoke with, timelines blurred, and the ledger remained an enigma. The villagers spoke of a peaceful community, yet Ilara sensed a fragile tension beneath the surface, an unspoken pact of silence. Back in her temporary lodgings, Ilara sat at a small desk. The ledger finally opened before her. The cursive entries danced in the flickering candlelight, hinting at inheritances awarded, debts settled, and names crossed out like forgotten sins. But the deeper she looked, the more the ledger seemed to pulse with secrets, its pages whispering of something darker than mere wills and estates. Her thoughts drifted to the villagers she had met, their ageless faces, the subtle glances exchanged when she asked too many questions, the way the fog seemed to cling to the village like a shroud. What had kept Eldermore suspended in time, and what price had been paid to preserve this eerie peace? A sudden knock at the door startled her from her reverie. Opening it, she found no one there, only a folded note on the doorstep. Unfolding it, she read a chilling message scrawled in elegant handwriting. "Some stones are best left unturned." Inspector Ilaros' heart quickened. The investigation had begun, and already she was entangled in a web of silence and secrets that threatened to engulf her. As the fog thickened outside, swallowing the village whole once more, Ilara knew one thing for certain. Eldermore was not just a place where time stood still, it was a place where the past refused to die, and she was about to uncover why. The library was silent except for the soft rustle of pages and the occasional sigh from Detective Inspector Ilara Voss. She sat hunched over a heavy tome, its fragile pages yellowed with age, the dim glow of the fireplace casting long shadows across the room. Opposite her, Thomas Graves adjusted his round spectacles and leaned closer, his voice a low murmur as he shared what little he knew of Eldermore's long-forgotten past. "The ledger is more than just records," Thomas said quietly. "It's a tapestry of our history, threads of loyalty, betrayal, and secrets that have shaped this village beyond what we dare admit." Ilara nodded, her sharp eyes scanning yet another faded entry. The names, dates, and cryptic notes hinted at relationships and events that defied ordinary explanations. Several families were linked not only by blood but by dark pacts and whispered accusations. The original murder, long concealed behind layers of silence, seemed to pulse at the heart of it all. Her mind drifted as Thomas recounted the oral traditions passed down through generations, tales of forbidden liaisons, secret meetings beneath the ancient oaks, and the shadow of a pact made in desperation. As the fire flickered, Ilara imagined the village centuries ago, a place much like today, yet gripped by fear and desire. In a sudden moment of clarity, a flashback unfolded in her mind's eye. She saw a young woman, her face pale and determined, slipping through the mist to meet a figure cloaked in darkness. Their whispered promises were laden with urgency and dread. A betrayal was brewing, one that would echo through time and bind the villagers in chains of immortality and silence. Later, in the cozy warmth of the inn, Sophie Whitlock sat beside Ilara, her fingers nervously twisting a worn locket. "People don't talk much," Sophie admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I've heard things. Stories about love that couldn't be, debts unpaid, and a secret some would kill to keep." Ilara listened carefully, sensing the girl's mix of hope and fear. It was a glimpse into the human heart beneath the village's eerie stillness, a reminder of the cost of the pact they all shared. The night grew colder, and as Alara stepped outside, the fog curled around her like a living thing. From the shadows of the forest, Margaret Langley emerged, her serene expression masking the weight of centuries. "Some truths," Margaret said softly, "are like the mist. They obscure, protect, and sometimes suffocate. Be careful what you seek, detective. There are costs to unveiling what time has concealed." Alara met her gaze, feeling the tension of their unspoken battle. The ledger was not just a record of past events. It was a key to understanding the village's cursed immortality and the sins that anchored it. Back in her room, Alara pored over the fragments of history, the voices of Eldamore's past whispering warnings and revelations. The more she learned, the more the line between past and present blurred. The betrayals and desires of centuries ago were alive in the fog, shaping every face she saw, every secret she uncovered. As dawn crept through the misted windows, Alara realized that, to solve the mystery, she would have to confront not only the village's dark legacy but the human cost of eternal life itself. The echoes of the past were calling, and she could no longer ignore their haunting song. The ledger's secrets were unraveling, and with them the fragile peace of Alara's journey into the village's heart of darkness was only just beginning, and the shadows whispered that some truths might be too terrible to bear. With a final glance at the fading night, Alara steeled herself. The past had many faces, and tonight she would meet them all. The village hall was thick with an almost tangible tension as Detective Inspector Alara Voss took her seat among the assembled villagers. The room, framed by ancient oak beams and walls lined with faded portraits of Eldamore's ancestors, carried the weight of unspoken histories. A cold draught slipped through the cracks in the window panes, mingling with the dense fog that perpetually cloaked the village outside. At the center, Margaret Langley stood with an unfaltering poise, her pale skin almost luminescent under the dim hanging lanterns. Silver strands in her dark hair caught the light as her serene eyes scanned the room, commanding attention without a word. "You must understand," Margaret began, her voice steady yet imbued with an undercurrent of sorrow. "The pact we speak of is not a mere trifle. It is the lifeblood of Eldamore's survival. Immortality, yes, but at a price one paid in blood and silence." Alara's gaze flicked to the villagers seated around her, faces etched with the same youthful appearance that defied time, their eyes revealing a mixture of reverence, fear, and something deeper resignation. She listened as voices rose and fell in uneasy chorus, some embracing the idea of eternal life as a blessing, others murmuring of curses and lost freedoms. Thomas Graves, the village historian, adjusted his round spectacles, his hands trembling slightly as he spoke. "Our history is written in shadows," he said quietly, "and in the ledger the sins of our forebears are etched in ink that refuses to fade. I have spent years guarding these stories, torn between the duty to protect this village and the need to reveal the truth." Sophie Whitlock sat nearby, her bright eyes wide yet clouded with yearning. "I was born into this cycle," she confessed, voice barely above a whisper. "Every day feels like a repetition of the last, a life without change. I want to leave, to find a world where time moves forward, where I can grow old and be free. But Eldamore holds me captive, as it does all of us." Alara felt the weight of their words settle heavily on her chest. The ledger was no longer just a record of inheritances and forgotten crimes. It was a testament to the cost of defying nature itself. She thought of her own past, the loss of her sister, the relentless pursuit of justice that had led her here. Now, confronted with a community trapped in eternal stasis, she wrestled with the complexity of right and wrong. Margaret's gaze met Ilara's, unflinching, Expose us, she said softly, and you will destroy not only our secret but the fragile peace that has kept our village safe for centuries. The room seemed to constrict as Alara considered the stakes. The villagers' divided views were a mirror to her own internal conflict. Was justice an absolute, or did it sometimes demand sacrifice? The ledger's secrets were a Pandora's box, and she held the key. Later, at the Whitlock Inn, the fire crackled as Sophie confided in Alara. The warmth of the hearth was a stark contrast to the cold fog pressing against the windows. I envy your world, Sophie admitted, one with beginnings and ends, where people age and change. Here we are shadows, repeating the same stories, bound by the ledger and the pact. Alara nodded, understanding the profound loneliness that came with eternal youth. The village, with its surface charm and hidden dread, was a prison as much as a sanctuary. In the quiet sanctuary of the village library, Thomas Graves sat hunched over ancient scrolls and brittle tomes. The soft scratch of his pen was the only sound as he recorded notes, his mind a battleground between loyalty to his ancestors and the growing urge to reveal the truth. The ledger, once a symbol of order, now felt like a chain binding him to a past he wished to break free from. As dusk fell, Alara found herself standing outside, the mist curling around her like a shroud. The cold air bit into her skin, but it was the weight of the village's secret that truly chilled her. The price of immortality was etched not just in the ledger's pages, but in the faces of those who lived it caught between blessing and curse, between preservation and decay. Her thoughts spiraled back to the choice that loomed ahead, to expose Eldermore's dark legacy and risk unraveling everything, or to protect a secret that had preserved lives at an unthinkable cost. The fog whispered around her, carrying with it the voices of countless generations. And Alara knew that the path forward would demand more than just truth. It would demand sacrifice. The night deepened, and with it, the shadows of Eldermore grew longer, weaving a narrative of loss, longing, and the haunting price of eternal life. Alara's journey was far from over, and as the ledger's secrets whispered their chilling tale, she braced herself for the storm that was to come. The parlor was steeped in shadows, the only light a flickering fire casting elongated shapes across the aged wallpaper and worn furnishings. Outside the window, the fog clung to the glass in thick, swirling folds, muffling the sounds of the village beyond. Detective Inspector Ilara Voss stood with her coat drawn tight, her dark eyes fixed on the figure who had summoned her here, Margaret Langley. Margaret's presence was undeniable. She stood with an effortless grace, her pale skin almost luminescent in the firelight, her silver-streaked hair framing a face that seemed untouched by time. There was a serene authority about her, a quiet command that filled the room as completely as the lingering scent of old wood and faint lavender. "Detective Voss," Margaret began, her voice low and steady, "you have stirred the waters of Eldermore, and the ripples reach deeper than you realize." Alara met her gaze, unflinching. "I am here to uncover the truth, the ledger, the disappearances, the impossibility of this village's timelessness. They all demand answers." Margaret's lips curved into a faint, almost sad smile. "Answers come at a price. Some truths are burdens, not gifts. You must decide if you are prepared to carry that weight." The room seemed to contract around them, the crackling fire the only sound breaking the thick silence. Thomas Graves lingered near the doorway, his round spectacles catching the firelight as he shifted nervously. He was caught in the crossfire between the past he revered and the present unraveling before them. Alara's voice hardened. "The ledger speaks of a packed immortality at a cost. How many lives have been sacrificed to keep this secret? How many more will suffer if it remains hidden? Margaret's gaze softened, revealing a flicker of pain beneath her composed exterior. The pact was made to preserve Eldermore, to protect those who have given everything for this village's survival. Without it, all would be lost. But at what cost? Alara challenged. You say survival, but what of justice? What of the lives erased, the crimes buried in silence? Margaret took a step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried the weight of centuries. Some scenes are the price of peace. You must understand, Elara, this village is a delicate balance. Expose the secret, and you risk shattering everything. The detective's mind raced, the fog of uncertainty mingling with the literal mist beyond the window. She thought of the ledger's cryptic entries, the vanished villager, the faces frozen in time around her. I cannot turn away from the truth, she said firmly, not when so much hangs in the balance. Margaret regarded her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well, but know this: once the veil is lifted, there is no returning. The past will claw its way into the present, and Eldermore will never be the same. Thomas cleared his throat, stepping forward. Perhaps there is a way to balance truth and preservation, he offered cautiously. We must consider the cost of revelation as carefully as the cost of silence. Elara glanced at him, appreciating his attempt at mediation, but knowing the gulf between their positions was vast. I intend to see this through, she said, for the sake of those forgotten, for the justice denied. Margaret's expression hardened imperceptibly. Then prepare yourself, detective. The night ahead will test your resolve in ways you cannot yet imagine. With that, the meeting ended, the heavy door closing behind Elara as she stepped back into the fog-laden night. The mist curled around her like a living thing, cold and unyielding. Her breath emerged in small clouds as she pulled her coat tighter, the weight of the confrontation settling deep within her bones. Each step away from the manor echoed with the unspoken challenge to unveil the secrets of Eldermore was to walk a path from which there might be no return. Yet, despite the warnings, despite the shadows gathering both outside and within, Elara's determination burned brighter than ever. The ledger's pages awaited her scrutiny, and with them, the chance to unearth the truth buried beneath centuries of silence. The village lay still beneath its cloak of fog, but beneath that stillness, the tides of change were rising. And in the quiet struggle between light and shadow, Elara Voss was ready to face whatever darkness came next. The muted ticking of the old clock on the mantelpiece seemed unnaturally loud in the silence of Evelyn Harper's dimly lit cottage. Elara Voss sat hunched over the weathered ledger, the brittle pages spread before her like a map to a buried world. Outside, the fog clung thickly to the windows, blurring the outlines of the village beyond, turning Eldermore into a shadowed realm of secrets and half-truths. For hours, Elara had been tracing the faded ink, her fingers trembling slightly as she deciphered cryptic notes and coded annotations. The ledger was more than a mere record of inheritances. It was a web of clandestine transactions, lost names, and whispered betrayals. Now, as the midnight hour approached, her eyes caught a peculiar entry, one she had somehow overlooked before. It was nestled deep in the ledger's heart, an entry marked not by a date or but by a simple, ominous symbol, a single black rose. Her breath caught. The entry referenced a name long thought to be above suspicion, a man whose line had always been respected in Eldermore, a revered ancestor named Jonathan Cairns. The note beside it was brief but damning: blood debt repaid in shadow, silence kept beneath the veil. Elara's pulse quickened. This was it, the original murder hinted at throughout her investigation, the secret the ledger had been guarding for centuries. She closed the ledger carefully and leaned back, the weight of the discovery pressing down on her. The room felt colder now, the fog outside seeming to press even closer. Questions churned in her mind. How had the village's elders concealed such a crime? What lengths had they gone to protect Jonathan Cairns' legacy and, by extension, the eerie timelessness of Eldamore itself? The next morning, as the mist still hugged the village streets, Ilara sought out Thomas Graves. The historian was waiting for her in the village library, a place heavy with the scent of old paper and dust. His eyes betrayed a flicker of apprehension as she laid the ledger open before him. "I found this," Ilara said quietly. "The Black Rose entry. It implicates Jonathan Cairns in the original murder." Thomas's face paled, and he adjusted his spectacles nervously. Yes, he admitted after a pause. Jonathan was involved, but the village couldn't allow the truth to surface. It would unravel everything: the pact, the immortality, the very fabric of Eldamore. He recounted the oral histories, stories passed down in hushed tones, of a murder covered up by an alliance of powerful families. The ledger had been the widow's way to document the debts and secrets. A ledger that only now revealed its most guarded entry. Later that day, Sophie Whitlock joined them, her bright eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and determination. "If what you say is true," she whispered, "then this isn't just about a murder. It's about everything: why no one ages, why the village is trapped in time." Their conversation was cut short by a sudden, cold presence. Margaret Langley appeared in the doorway, her serene expression masking a fierce resolve. "You must stop this investigation, Ilara," she said softly but with unyielding authority. "Some truths are too dangerous. Revealing them will destroy Eldamore and all who live here." Ilara met Margaret's gaze steadily. The truth must come to light, no matter the cost. Margaret's eyes darkened briefly before she turned away, leaving an uneasy silence behind. That evening, Ilara found herself alone on the hill overlooking the village. The lanterns flickered like distant stars beneath the swirling fog, casting Eldamore in a ghostly glow. The ledger's secrets weighed heavily on her mind. The village's history was stained with blood and silence, its timelessness a curse born of a deadly pact and a long-forgotten crime. Could she expose the truth without destroying the fragile peace? Or would the cost of justice be too high in a place where time itself refused to move forward? As the fog thickened, Ilara's resolve hardened. The ledger's pages might be fragile, but the truths they held were unbreakable, and she would unravel them no matter where the path led. But as shadows lengthened and the village held its breath, the question lingered ominously in the mist: who among them would pay the ultimate price when the widow's ledger was finally closed? The night deepened, and the village of Eldamore seemed to hold its breath. The secrets buried in that ancient ledger were no longer safe. Ilara Voss was a force that could not be deterred, and the fragile balance maintained for centuries was beginning to crumble. Somewhere, hidden behind familiar faces, the original murderer's legacy awaited reckoning. Detective Inspector Ilara Voss sat alone in the hushed sanctuary of the village library, a single lamp casting a warm, flickering glow over the worn, leather-bound ledger sprawled before her. The rain tapped a soft, unrelenting rhythm against the stained-glass windows, the sound a quiet counterpoint to the storm raging within her thoughts. Each page she turned seemed heavier than the last, as if the ink itself bore the weight of centuries of secrets and sins. Eldamore was no ordinary village, and the ledger, more than a mere record of inheritances, was a testament to the unnatural pact that bound its inhabitants. To reveal it all would be to shatter the delicate illusion of peace and timelessness, but to leave it buried was to betray her very principles. Her fingers traced the faded script, the names intertwining in a web of inheritance and hidden crimes. The ledger whispered of lives extended beyond natural years, of bargains struck in desperation and kept in silence. Alara's mind replayed the voices she'd heard: Thomas Graves' cautious warnings, Sophie Whitlock's trembling hopes, and Margaret Langley's calm yet unyielding threats. Each had laid bare a part of the village's soul, a soul stained with both hope and despair. The bell above the library door tinkled softly, breaking her reverie. She looked up to find Margaret Langley entering, her presence as commanding and serene as ever. Draped in her vintage black attire, silver-streaked hair glimmering faintly under the lamplight. Margaret's eyes held the depth of ages and the weight of unspoken pain. "Detective Voss," Margaret said, her voice smooth but edged with an unmistakable gravity. "I see you've been delving deep into the Ledger's secrets." Alara rose slowly, meeting Margaret's gaze without flinching. "It's impossible to ignore. The village's timelessness, the disappearances, the pact at all points to one truth." Margaret's expression softened momentarily, a flicker of sorrow crossing her features. "You must understand, Alara, some truths come at too high a cost. This village, our lives, are bound by that cost. Exposing it would unravel everything, destroy the fragile balance we've maintained for centuries." "Balance built on lies," Alara replied, her voice steady but tinged with frustration. "How many more lives have to be sacrificed to keep this secret? How many more crimes forgotten?" Margaret sighed, stepping closer, her gaze unwavering. "Sometimes justice must yield to mercy. You seek truth, but at what price? Are you prepared to bear the consequences, not just for yourself, but for all of Eldamore?" Before Alara could answer, the door opened again. Sophie Whitlock stepped inside, her curly auburn hair slightly damp from the rain, eyes bright but troubled. "Alara," Sophie said softly, "I overheard. I don't want to lose this village, our home, our lives as we know them. Yes, it's flawed, but it's all I've ever known. What happens if the secret comes out? What then?" Alara looked at Sophie, seeing the conflict etched in her features, the desire for freedom battling with the fear of loss. "I understand, Sophie," Alara said gently. "But secrets this deep don't stay buried forever. And sometimes the truth is the only way to heal." Sophie's lips pressed into a thin line, but she nodded slowly, as if accepting a painful truth. Later, Alara met Thomas Graves on the misty village green. The fog curled around them like living shadows, muffling sound and blurring edges. Thomas stood silent, spectacles glinting faintly, his face a mask of quiet resignation. "You see the crossroads we face," Thomas said finally, his voice low. "The ledger is more than history, it's a burden. To reveal it is to risk everything. To protect it is to live a lie." Alara exhaled wearily, the weight of their predicament pressing down like the fog itself. "I've spent my life chasing justice," she said, "but here justice feels complicated." Thomas nodded. "In Eldamore, truth and peace are intertwined in ways outsiders cannot understand. You must decide which is more important." That night, alone in her room, Alara stared out at the swirling mist beyond the window. The ledger lay closed on her desk, its secrets sealed for the moment, but her mind raced with possibilities. To expose the truth would bring light, but would also cast long shadows. To protect the secret was to deny justice, but preserve a fragile peace. As sleep eluded her, Alara realized the path forward was a choice between two agonizing truths, and whichever she chose, there would be no turning back. The crossroads had come, and the ledger's silence awaited her decision. The village hall was suffused with a brittle air of unrest as Detective Inspector Alara Voss stood at the center of the storm she had stirred. The room, usually a place of quiet communal gatherings, now echoed with raised voices, urgent whispers, and the heavy weight of fractured trust. The wooden beams above creaked faintly under the pressure of the moment, and the dim gaslights flickered, casting long shadows that danced upon the faces of Eldermore's residents, some pale with fear, others flushed with anger. Illyra's voice was steady, though her heart thrummed with a fierce urgency. "The ledger is not merely a record of inheritances," she said, her gaze sweeping the room. "It contains the truths you have all been hiding, the pacts, the crimes, the price you have paid to stay young." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sophie Whitlock, standing near the back, bit her lip, eyes wide with a mixture of hope and apprehension. She had long yearned to break free from Eldermore's suffocating secrets, and now the truth was unraveling like a tightly wound thread. But not all received Alara's revelations with open arms. Margaret Langley, standing at the front in her vintage black attire, her silver-streaked hair gleaming faintly in the low light, radiated a calm yet formidable presence. Her eyes, ancient and sharp, locked onto Alara with a quiet fury. "You would destroy us all," Margaret said, her voice a chilling whisper that carried through the hall. "This village has survived because of the secret we keep. It is not yours to unveil." Thomas Graves, the village historian, nervously adjusted his round spectacles and stepped forward. "We must be cautious," he implored. "Truth is a double-edged sword here. To expose it is to risk everything, our peace, our very lives. Yet silence is a heavy burden." The meeting descended into heated debate. Some villagers, emboldened by Illyra's courage, spoke of wanting change to confront the darkness and seek justice. Others rallied to Margaret's call for preservation, fearing what the unraveling of the truth might unleash. Accusations flew like daggers. Old friendships fractured under the strain. Eldermore, once a village bound by unspoken understanding, now teetered on the edge of collapse. Later that evening, Alara wandered the mist-laden streets alone, the fog curling around her like ghostly fingers. The village felt different, fractured, vulnerable, and raw. She passed the shuttered windows of quaint cottages, each hiding its own secrets, each harboring silent fears. The eternal youth of the villagers, once a curiosity, now seemed a curse, a mask that could no longer hide the cracks beneath. Her solitude was broken by a sudden knock at the door of the inn. Sophie appeared, her face pale but determined. "Margaret warned me today," she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "She said I was treading on dangerous ground. But I want to help. I want Eldermore to be free." Alara nodded, gratitude mingling with a deep sadness. This village, so steeped in secrets, was slowly unraveling, and the cost was greater than she had imagined. Meanwhile, Margaret moved through the shadows, gathering her loyal followers among the village elders. In the dim back room of the inn, she confronted Sophie, her voice low and menacing. "Your curiosity will be your undoing," she warned. "Some truths are better left buried for the sake of us all." Sophie's eyes flashed with defiance, but the threat hung heavy in the air. The next day, Thomas sought out Alara privately, his usual reserve replaced by a rare vulnerability. "I fear for Eldermore," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "This secret has been our protection and our prison. Now, with the village divided, I wonder if we can survive the coming storm." Alara placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We must face it together," she said. "Only by confronting the past can we hope to find a future." But as the fog thickened and the village's fragile facade crumbled, Ilara knew the path ahead would be perilous. Loyalties shattered, alliances shifted, and the true cost of truth began to emerge in stark relief. As night fell, the village seemed to hold its breath, the silence heavy with unsaid words and unseen dangers. Ilara stood at the edge of the square, staring into the swirling mist, her mind racing. Somewhere in the fog lay the answers and the threats. The Ledger's secrets were no longer just pages in a book. They were the very fabric tearing Eldamore apart. And in the shadows, eyes watched, waiting for the moment to strike. The shattered facade of Eldamore was no longer just a metaphor. It was an ominous reality. Ilara's resolve hardened. The truth was within reach, but with it came a reckoning that would test every bond, every belief. The question was no longer if Eldamore would survive the revelation, but what price they would all pay when the dust settled. The rain had begun in a steady, unrelenting rhythm by the time Ilara Vorse returned to the inn. The fog outside clung to the village like a suffocating shroud, softening the edges of the crooked cottages and dampening the usual sounds of life. Inside her modest room, the faint flicker of candlelight cast long shadows on the faded wallpaper, and the scent of old wood and wax mingled with the lingering chill that seeped through the cracked windowpane. Ilara sat heavily at the small desk, the widow's ledger open before her, its yellowed pages whispering secrets and sins long buried. Her fingers traced the cryptic script, but the words seemed heavier now, weighted with more than mere ink and paper. They carried the burden of lives lived in silence, sacrifices made in the name of survival, and a legacy so dark it seemed to seep into the very fabric of Eldamore. Ilara's thoughts drifted, unbidden, to the sister she had lost years ago, victim of a crime unsolved, a truth denied. The parallels between her own grief and the village's collective pain pressed against her chest like a stone. She remembered the faces she had seen today, the wary eyes of villagers who smiled too tightly, voices that faltered beneath the weight of unspoken truths. Margaret Langley's serene but unyielding presence lingered in her mind, a living testament to the cost of the pact that granted the village its eerie timelessness. It was a cost paid in silence, in secrets seared into generations, in lives that stretched too long and memories that refused to fade. Ilara's resolve hardened. To bring justice here meant more than solving a murder. It meant unraveling the very threads that held Eldamore together. But at what price? She knew all too well how the pursuit of truth could leave scars deeper than any wound. The next morning dawned grey and heavy with mist. Ilara met Thomas Graves beneath the ancient oaks near the village cemetery. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the gravestones stood like silent sentinels, their inscriptions worn by time. Thomas's voice was low as he spoke of the ancestors whose names were etched in stone, their stories swallowed by the fog just as surely as the villagers' secrets. They paid a price, Thomas murmured, his eyes distant, not just in blood, but in the silence they left behind. Ilara nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle around her like the mist. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sophie Whitlock, whose bright eyes belied the tension she carried within. Later that evening, by the fire in the inn's lounge, Sophie's voice trembled as she confessed her yearning to escape the suffocating confines of Eldamore. "I want to believe there's something beyond this fog," Sophie whispered, tracing patterns in the firelight. "But sometimes it feels like the village itself is a cage." Ilara reached out, her own voice soft but steady. "Sometimes the hardest chains are the ones we don't see, but breaking them, That's the only way to find freedom. Yet even as hope flickered, the shadows lengthened. Margaret's warning echoed in Alara's thoughts, reminder that some truths, once unearthed, could shatter more than just illusions. The village was a fragile balance of darkness and light, and Alara's intrusion threatened to tip the scales. That night, as the fog swallowed Eldermore whole, Alara sat once more with the ledger. Each entry felt like a silent scream, a testament to the cost of silence and the price paid for immortality. She wondered how many more lives had been sacrificed to keep the secret safe, how many more were willing to remain shackled to it. Her own grief intertwined with the village's, creating a tapestry of loss and longing. But in the depths of that sorrow, a fierce determination burned. Alara knew that to honor those silenced by time and secrecy, she had to see this through no matter what the cost. Outside, the rain softened, and for a moment, the fog lifted just enough to reveal the twisted, gnarled branches of the ancient trees. In that fleeting clarity, Alara glimpsed a path forward, a path fraught with peril, but also with the hope of redemption. The ledger was more than a record, it was a key, and she held it in her hands, ready to unlock the truths Eldermore had long tried to bury. But as the village stirred awake beneath the lingering mist, Alara sensed the quiet before a storm. The cost of silence was about to be paid in full, and the echoes of the past would demand their reckoning. With every secret unveiled, the boundary between justice and destruction blurred, and Alara stood at its edge, poised to step into the unknown. The night was far from over, and the ledger's story was far from finished. The village of Eldermore lay swathed in its familiar cloak of mist, a silken veil that seemed to swallow sound and bend light, twisting the familiar into something strange and untrustworthy. Detective Inspector Alara Voss stood at the edge of the village green, the damp cold seeping through her trench coat, chilling her to the bone despite the stubborn warmth of the wool beneath. The fog drifted in thick tendrils, curling around the ancient cottages like spectral fingers, blurring their sharp lines into soft shadows. Every footstep was muffled, every whisper swallowed, as if the very air conspired to keep its secrets hidden. Ilaros's breath came out in small clouds, brief puffs of warmth in the chilly air. She watched as villagers moved through the mist figures, gliding silently, faces half hidden beneath scarves or shadow, eyes flickering with something she couldn't quite name. There was a collective reticence in their movements, a hesitation that spoke of fear and long-practiced avoidance. The fog was more than weather here. It was a shroud for truths best left unspoken. Her thoughts drifted back to the ledger, the cryptic entries that had brought her here, and the stories of immortality whispered in the dark corners of Eldermore's history. The village's eternal youth was no mere coincidence, and the ledger's secrets pressed heavily on her mind. Later that evening, Alara found herself in the dim warmth of the inn's parlour, a small room alive with the soft crackle of the fire and the murmur of low voices. Sophie Whitlock sat across from her, hands wrapped tightly around a chipped ceramic mug. Her auburn curls caught the firelight, casting a halo of warmth against the shadowed room. Sophie's eyes were bright, but clouded with anxiety. She leaned forward, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "There are things here, Detective," Sophie said, her voice trembling slightly. "Things people won't say out loud. The ledger isn't just a book, it's a chain, binding us all. Some want to break free, but others, they're terrified of what that would mean." Alara nodded, absorbing the weight behind the words. Sophie's reluctant alliance was a fragile thread of trust in a tapestry woven with lies. The innkeeper's daughter had become her unexpected guide through the village's tangled web of secrets. Days later, In the hushed sanctum of the village library, Thomas Graves sat hunched over a pile of yellowed papers, his round spectacles perched precariously on his nose. The flicker of a single desk lamp illuminated his lined face, etched with the burden of years spent guarding Eldermore's oral traditions. His fingers traced the faded ink of ancient documents as he wrestled with the knowledge they contained. "The past is never truly gone," Thomas muttered to himself, voice barely audible, "but some truths can destroy as much as they reveal." Alara watched him carefully, sensing the internal conflict roiling beneath his cautious exterior. Thomas was a man torn between loyalty to the village and the stark reality she sought to uncover. His hesitation was a mirror of the village itself, caught between preservation and revelation. The atmosphere grew heavy with unspoken fears as Margaret Langley stepped out from the shadows beneath the skeletal branches of the ancient oak that marked the village's heart. Her pale skin was almost luminescent in the fog, silver-streaked hair framing a serene yet unyielding face. The weight of centuries seemed to rest on her shoulders, the burden of keeping Eldermore's secret sealed tight. "Detective," Margaret's voice was soft but carried the steel of command. "There are boundaries you must not cross. Some knowledge comes at too high a price." Alara met her gaze without flinching, the tension between them crackling like static in the cold air. The swirling mist seemed to conspire with Margaret, wrapping around them in a suffocating embrace that mirrored the village's stifling silence. "I am here for the truth," Alara replied steadily. "No secret should be allowed to fester in darkness forever." Margaret's eyes flickered with a mixture of sorrow and warning. The truth can be a blade. Sometimes it cuts deeper than any wound. Choose your path carefully. As the fog thickened and the night deepened, Alara felt the weight of the village's secrets pressing in on every side. The echoes of the past whispered through the mist, urging her onward even as they threatened to engulf her. With Sophie's tentative trust, Thomas's conflicted knowledge, and Margaret's fierce guardianship all converging, the path ahead was fraught with peril and possibility. Alara knew that to pierce the fog of Eldermore's silence, she would have to navigate the shadows within the village and within herself. The stakes had never been higher, and the cost of failure could be eternal. The night closed around her, thick with mist and mystery, as Eldermore waited, breath held, for the dawn of its reckoning. The fog hung thick over Eldermore as dusk settled, weaving its cold fingers through narrow lanes and creeping under the eaves of weathered cottages. Detective Inspector Alara Voss stood just beyond the glow of the village inn's stained glass windows, her breath shallow, eyes sharp beneath the brim of her coat's collar. Inside, the low murmur of voices carried faintly, punctuated by the clink of glasses and the occasional creak of wooden floorboards. She had chosen this vantage point deliberately. The shadows, her reluctant ally in a place where trust was as elusive as the mist. Sophie Whitlock sat across the room at a corner table, her auburn curls catching the firelight as she leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. Opposite her, Thomas Graves adjusted his spectacles nervously, the crease of worry deepening on his brow. Hilary's keen gaze caught every subtle shift, the tightening of Sophie's jaw, the hesitant flicker in Thomas's eyes. The village historian, usually so composed, was unraveling under the weight of unspoken truths. "You can't keep sitting on the fence," Sophie hissed, her words laced with frustration and fear. "People are starting to notice, Thomas. They're wondering where your loyalties lie." Thomas's fingers twitched against the worn tabletop. "I'm trying to do what's best, Sophie. For Eldermore, but some truths could tear everything apart." The tension in the room was palpable, a fragile thread stretched taut between past and present, secrecy and revelation. Alara recognized the signs, the delicate dance of allegiance and fear, the invisible chains that bound these villagers to their shared history. She knew that beneath the surface of quiet civility lay currents of desire, guilt, and protection, all tangled like the twisted roots of the ancient oaks surrounding the village. Later, the rhythmic pounding of hammer against anvil echoed faintly from the blacksmith's workshop, a steady beat anchoring the restless night. Alara approached cautiously, the scent of burning coal and iron mingling with the damp earth. Inside, James Marlowe wiped sweat from his brow, his broad shoulders tense beneath a soot-streaked shirt. His eyes flicked up with suspicion, the hard lines of his face softening just a fraction as he regarded her. "I don't trust outsiders," he said gruffly, voice low and guarded, "especially those poking into things best left alone." Alara nodded, her tone measured. "I'm not here to bring harm, James. I just want to understand." He hesitated, the hammer poised mid-air before it fell again with a dull ring. "There's more in this village than you see, more than the stories you're told. But talking can be dangerous." The unspoken warning hung between them, a reminder of the delicate balance Alara was challenging. Yet, beneath James's rough exterior, she sensed a reluctant vulnerability, a man caught between loyalty to his home and the creeping dread of what secrets might surface. As night deepened, Alara found herself drawn to the village square, where Margaret Langley stood solitary beneath the skeletal branches of a gnarly tree. The mist curled around her like an ethereal cloak, silver-streaked hair gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Her serene expression was a mask, concealing the storm of emotions roiling beneath. Alara watched as Margaret's gaze swept over the sleeping village, her posture rigid with the weight of centuries-old burdens. The cost of immortality was etched into every line of her pale face, every measured breath. She was the keeper of the secret, the guardian of a legacy steeped in sacrifice and shadow. A sudden chill settled over Ilaros's spine as she realized the depth of Margaret's resolve. This was no mere antagonist. She was a woman bound by duty and sorrow, fighting to preserve a fragile peace forged in blood and silence. The following evening, Alara found herself in a hidden garden behind the inn, a sanctuary where wildflowers defied the pervasive gloom. Sophie was there, waiting with a hesitant smile, her eyes reflecting the fading amber of twilight. They sat close on a worn bench, the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine surrounding them. Sophie's voice was soft, tinged with exhaustion and hope. "Sometimes I wonder if this place will ever let me go," she confessed. "All these years, it's been like living beneath a glass bell, beautiful but suffocating." Alara nodded, understanding the weight of invisible bonds that tethered them both. "Secrets can be prisons," she said quietly. "But sometimes breaking free means facing the pain they hide." Their shared vulnerability forged a fragile trust, a fleeting connection in a village where every smile masked a story and every glance held a question. As the first stars flickered in the night sky, Alara felt the threads of Eldermore's unseen bonds tighten around her, a complex tapestry of loyalty, fear, and desire that would challenge everything she thought she knew. The investigation was no longer just about uncovering facts. It was about navigating the human heart's hidden chambers, where truth and deception blurred in the fog. And as Alara prepared to delve deeper, she knew the path ahead was fraught with peril, not only to the village's fragile peace, but to her own soul. The night whispered promises and threats alike, the unseen bonds of Eldermore pulling tighter with each passing moment. Somewhere within this tangled web lay the key to the widow's ledger and to the village's eternal secret. But to grasp it, Alara would have to confront not only the village's mysteries, but the unspoken desires and fears that bound its people together in silence. And in the shadows, eyes watched. Loyalties would be tested, hearts would break, and the cost of truth would become all too clear. The fog deepened once more, swallowing the village whole as Eldamore's unseen bonds tightened their grip, unrelenting, inescapable, eternal. The air in Eldamore felt heavier than usual, the fog pressing down like a suffocating shroud as Detective Inspector Elra Voss sat hunched over the brittle pages of the widow's ledger in the dimly lit corner of the village. In candlelight flickered, casting wavering shadows across the room, lending an almost spectral quality to the faded ink and yellowed paper. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the cryptic entries anew, searching for a thread to unravel the tangled web of secrets that had ensnared the village for centuries. Hours passed unnoticed as her fingers traced the faded lines until her breath caught. There, obscured beneath a later scrawl, was an entry she hadn't seen before, an addition carefully concealed, yet unmistakably present. The words hinted at a betrayal within the original pact, a name crossed out, a date shifted, and a hint that one of the founding members had turned on their own. The ledger was no longer a mere record. It was a living testament to fractured trust and hidden agendas. Alara's heart quickened. This was the turning tide she had hoped for. The discovery promised new leverage, a crack in the seemingly impenetrable wall Margaret Langley and her loyalists had erected. But with that hope came a chilling realization: the closer she edged toward the truth, the more dangerous her position became. The following evening, under the cloak of twilight and thickening fog, Ilara met Sophie Whitlock at the village's edge near the ancient woods. Their breaths mingled in the cold air, small clouds of urgency that seemed to punctuate the gravity of their whispered conversation. Sophie, eyes bright yet shadowed with apprehension, spoke of shifting loyalties among the villagers. The once cohesive front was splintering. Fear was breeding uncertainty, and with it, unexpected alliances. "We're not the only ones questioning anymore," Sophie murmured, her voice barely carrying over the rustle of leaves. "I've heard whispers quiet, but they're there. People are scared, but some want the truth, even if it means tearing everything apart." Ilara nodded, the weight of Sophie's words settling on her. The village was a powder keg, and the spark had been lit. Their meeting was abruptly cut short by the distant chime of the village clock, its sound muffled by the fog but no less ominous. Ilara glanced around, senses prickling. The quiet was too deep, too expectant. Back in the village square, the next day, a confrontation unfolded beneath the ever-present mist. Margaret Langley appeared as if conjured by the fog itself, her presence serene yet commanding, her pale skin and silver-streaked hair stark against the dark vintage attire she wore. Her voice was calm, but each word carried an undeniable edge as she addressed Ilara before a gathering crowd of villagers who lingered in shadowed doorways, their faces taut with a mixture of fear and stubborn resolve. "You tread dangerous ground, Inspector," Margaret warned, her gaze unwavering. "Some truths are not meant to be unearthed. The balance we have maintained here is fragile, and your pursuit threatens to unravel more than you can comprehend." Ilara met her stare, unflinching. "The truth does not fear light, Margaret, and neither do I." The villagers shifted uneasily, the tension palpable as the silent battle lines were drawn in the mist. Later, seeking clarity amid the turmoil, Ilara visited Thomas Graves in his cluttered study. The room was a sanctuary of aged tomes, dusty relics, and the persistent scent of old paper. Thomas, ever the reluctant guardian of Eldamore's history, carefully unfurled a worn map on his desk. The edges were frayed, the ink faded yet still legible, outlining hidden paths, safe havens, and secret meeting places scattered throughout the village. "This," Thomas said quietly, "is where the village's fractures are most visible. These places have long served as sanctuaries for those who question, for those who protect. The pact may have bound us, but it has also divided us." Ilara studied the map, a mosaic of loyalty and fear laid bare. The knowledge was a double-edged sword, offered new avenues for her investigation, but also revealed the depth of the village's internal strife. As night descended once more over Eldermoor, the fog seemed to thicken, swallowing the village whole. Ilara stood at the crossroads of revelation and danger, her conviction tempered by the rising peril. The ledger's secrets were unraveling, and with each thread pulled, the fabric of the village's uneasy peace threatened to come undone. The turning tide had come, and there was no turning back. Yet, as Ilara prepared for the challenges ahead, a lingering question haunted her thoughts. In a village bound by ancient pacts and buried betrayals, who could she truly trust? The answer, she knew, would define not only the fate of Eldermoor, but her own as well. As the candle flickered and the fog pressed close once more, Ilara steeled herself. The night was far from over, and the shadows still held their secrets. Detective Inspector Ilara Voss sat in the dimly lit cottage of the recently deceased Evelyn Harper, the weight of the ledger before her as heavy as the fog pressing against the window. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and dust, the kind that seemed to hold centuries of secrets. Her fingers hesitated over the fragile pages, the cryptic entries looping in elegant yet faded script. Names, dates, and cryptic notations intertwined in a pattern that whispered of inheritances, but also of disappearances that had long slipped from living memory. Ilira's eyes narrowed as she traced a particular entry, a transfer of property that coincided suspiciously with the absence of a villager who was never spoken of openly. The ledger was more than a mere record. It was a map of Eldermoor's hidden past, a ledger of lives both preserved and lost. Despite her training, the detective felt a chill settle in her bones, a reminder that the village was not simply quaint or stagnant, but alive with unspoken tensions. Her investigation led her next to the village library, a cramped, cluttered room smelling of musty books and wood polish. Here she met Thomas Graves, Eldermoor's historian and guardian of oral traditions. Thomas was a wiry man in his late 30s, his round spectacles perched precariously on a sharp nose. He wore tweed jackets that seemed as old as the village itself, and his cautious demeanor betrayed the weight of his knowledge. As they sat across from each other at a scarred oak table, Thomas's voice was low and deliberate. Detective Eldermoor's history is not written in stone, but whispered in shadows. The ledger you hold is a dangerous thing. It ties this village to secrets that have kept us bound for generations. I urge you, be careful where you dig. Some truths are better left buried. Ilara met his gaze steadily. I understand the risks, Mr. Graves, but I came here to uncover the truth. If the ledger holds the key, then I must follow it wherever it leads. Thomas nodded slowly, a flicker of respect in his eyes. Very well, but know that the village protects its own. Not all will welcome your inquiries. The historian's warning echoed in her mind as she left the library, the steady patter of rain soft against the cobblestones. At the Silver Harp Inn, a place warm with the glow of candlelight and the murmur of subdued conversation, Ilara sought another contact, Sophie Whitlock, the innkeeper's daughter. Sophie was a woman in her early 30s with curly auburn hair that framed a face marked by both charm and caution. Leaning against the polished bar, Sophie's bright eyes flickered with nervous energy. "I don't know why you're digging into these old stories," she said quietly, "but I've heard things whispers that the ledger isn't just about who inherits what. There are disappearances, strange happenings tied to certain families. It's not spoken of openly, but it's there." Alara leaned in. "Why do you help me?" Sophie hesitated, then shrugged. "Maybe I want to believe there's a way out of this place. Eldamore feels like a trap sometimes, like it's stuck in time. Maybe the truth can set us free, or maybe it'll just make things worse." Their conversation was interrupted by the low murmur of other patrons and the clinking of glasses, reminders of the village's outward calm. Yet beneath the surface, Alara sensed a current of fear and hope intertwined. Later, as twilight deepened and the fog thickened, Alara wandered the slick cobblestone streets. Gas lamps cast muted pools of light, their glow swallowed gradually by the encroaching mist. Every shadow seemed alive, every distant footstep a whisper of secrets kept too long. The village itself was a living puzzle, each building, each face a piece she needed to fit together. The ledger's entries haunted her thoughts. Who had disappeared? Why? And how were these disappearances linked to the inheritances meticulously recorded? Eldamore's serene facade was cracking, revealing a labyrinth of hidden truths. Elaros' resolve hardened. She would follow the ledger's clues, no matter where they led. But as the fog curled around the village like a shroud, she couldn't shake the feeling that the deeper she delved, the more she risked not only uncovering the past, but disturbing a fragile piece that had kept this timeless place intact for centuries. And somewhere in the shadows, she was sure someone was watching her every move, waiting to see how far she would go. The ledger's secrets were beginning to stir. The cold fog clung to the ancient stones of Eldamore as twilight slipped into night, wrapping the village in its persistent chill. Inside the dimly lit village hall, shadows flickered against the walls, cast by a circle of candles placed meticulously on the worn oak table. Margaret Langley stood at the head of the gathering, her serene but commanding presence cutting through the murmurs like a sharpened blade. Her pale skin almost glowed under the wavering candlelight, and the silver strands in her dark hair caught the light, framing a face that seemed untouched by the passage of time. Around her, a small group of village elders sat rigidly, their expressions a mixture of reverence and steely resolve. The air was thick with tension, each breath drawn as if in preparation for a battle fought not with weapons, but with secrets and wills. Margaret's voice was low but unwavering as she addressed them. "The time has come for us to stand united. The ledger, our legacy, and the pact we share are at risk. This outsider, Alara Voss, threatens everything we have preserved for centuries. We must protect our secret at all costs." A murmur of assent rippled through the room. Faces once familiar now seemed etched with lines of worry and defiance, betraying the calm exteriors that had long masked their inner turmoil. Thomas Graves adjusted his spectacles, his wiry frame tense as he listened. Though loyal to the village and its history, the weight of the coming storm pressed heavily on him. Beside him, Sophie Whitlock's bright eyes darted anxiously, her usual charm subdued by the gravity of the moment. Meanwhile, outside, the fog thickened, muffling the sounds of the gathering inside. Alara Voss moved through the mist with purpose, her trench coat pulled tightly around her. Each breath formed a fleeting ghost in the cold air, mirroring the unease that settled deep in her chest. Her steps echoed softly on the cobblestone path as she approached the village hall, the place where the fate of Eldamore's dark secret would soon be decided. Inside, Margaret's gaze sharpened, sensing the inevitable confrontation looming on the horizon. "We have sacrificed much to maintain this balance," she continued, her voice steady but carrying the weight of generations. "Exposure would not only destroy our way of life but unravel the very fabric of our existence. We must be vigilant, for the price of failure is far greater than any of us can bear." Ilara entered the hall quietly, her presence immediately felt. The room's atmosphere shifted, a palpable charge of defiance meeting unwavering resolve. Margaret's eyes locked onto hers, a silent challenge passing between them. Around them, the elders braced themselves, ready to defend their secret, while Sophie and Thomas exchanged uncertain glances, caught between loyalty and the truth. Father Benedict stood apart, near the chapel doorway, his hands folded in quiet prayer. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows over his face, revealing lines of weariness and hope intertwined. His whispered prayers for guidance echoed softly, a spiritual undercurrent beneath the gathering storm. The night stretched long, filled with hushed discussions and steely glances. Outside, the fog seemed to pulse with the village's collective breath, an ever-present reminder of the secrets buried deep beneath Eldermore's timeless surface. Ilara felt the weight of history pressing down on her, the ledger's cryptic entries no longer mere words but the harbingers of a reckoning. As the villagers prepared for what was to come, alliances quietly formed and fractured in the shadows. Sophie's voice trembled as she confided in Thomas, torn between the desire to protect her home and the yearning to uncover the truth. Thomas's eyes reflected the same conflict, his loyalty to Eldermore clashing with the dawning realization that the past could no longer be hidden. Margaret's final words to her followers resonated like a solemn vow. "We are the guardians of a legacy forged in blood and silence. To fail now is to doom us all." Ilara's heart pounded as she steadied herself for the confrontation ahead. The ledger's secrets, the pack's cost, and the village's fragile peace hung in a delicate balance. The gathering storm was upon them, and the choices made tonight would echo through the fog-shrouded streets of Eldermore for generations to come. Outside, the mist thickened, swallowing the village in a shroud of uncertainty. Ilara glanced back once more before stepping into the unknown, the cold night air biting at her resolve. The battle for truth and survival had begun, and in Eldermore no one could afford to remain untouched by its consequences. The flickering candlelight inside the village hall dimmed as the night deepened, but the fire of determination burned fiercely in the eyes of those who dared to defy the darkness. The gathering storm was not merely of weather, but of souls entwined in secrets that refused to stay buried. And as Eldermore braced itself, Ilara understood that the coming hours would change everything, perhaps forever. Detective Inspector Ilara Voss sat in the corner of the village library, the single candle on the oak table, her only companion against the encroaching shadows. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the faded pages of the widow's ledger spread before her. The fog outside thickened, its tendrils pressing against the ancient window panes, as if trying to seep into the room itself. The ledger was no longer just a record of inheritances. It was a map of secrets, a key to the village's unnatural existence. For hours, Ilara had traced the cryptic symbols interspersed with the neat, looping handwriting of centuries past. Each entry hinted at transactions far beyond mere property, disappearances, warnings, and, most disturbingly, references to a pact. A pact she now realized was no mere legend whispered in Eldermore's taverns, but a binding contract that ensnared the villagers in a web of immortality and silence. She leaned back, the wood creaking beneath her, and allowed herself a moment to absorb the weight of her discovery. The ledger was not just a ledger. It was a ledger of life itself, a ledger that held the power to grant eternal youth, but at an unimaginable price. A sudden knock at the heavy wooden door startled her. She closed the ledger carefully and rose, her trench coat whispering in the stillness. Opening the door, she found Margaret Langley standing in the doorway, her presence as commanding and serene as ever. The pale skin of Margaret's face contrasted sharply with the deep black of her vintage attire, silver strands of hair framing her ageless visage. "Detective Voss," Margaret said softly, her voice carrying both warning and a strange sadness. "The ledger is not what you think it is. There are forces at play here that you cannot begin to understand." Elara met her gaze steadily. "I understand more than you think, Margaret. The ledger is a binding contract. It grants immortality, but at a cost, and the villagers are trapped by it." Margaret's eyes flickered with a mixture of pride and despair. Yes, the original pact was made to protect the village from decay and ruin, but it demands silence, secrecy, and sacrifice. To break it would be to unravel the very fabric of LEDGER. Before Elara could respond, footsteps echoed softly behind Margaret. Thomas Graves and Sophie Whitlock stepped into the light, their expressions tense, eyes flickering between the two women. "We've been debating," Thomas said quietly, adjusting his spectacles nervously, "whether to stand with you or with Margaret. The past weighs heavy on us all." Sophie nodded, her auburn curls catching the candlelight. "The truth is dangerous, but so is living a lie." Elara felt the fragile alliance shift beneath her feet. The village's future hung in a precarious balance. She returned to the ledger, her fingers tracing the edges of a hidden compartment she had just discovered. Inside lay a faded letter, its ink blurred by time but still legible. The letter detailed the terms of the original pact immortality granted in exchange for eternal silence and the surrender of personal freedom. Any who defied the pact would face consequences far worse than death. A cold draft swept through the room as distant thunder rumbled, the storm outside mirroring the turmoil within. "This is the truth," Elara said, her voice steady but heavy. "The ledger isn't just a record, it's a prison." Margaret sighed, stepping closer. "And yet, it is the only thing holding us together. Without it, Eldamore would fall apart. The weight of centuries pressed down on them all." Elara knew that the coming confrontation would decide not just the fate of the village, but the very meaning of justice, mortality, and sacrifice. Her mind raced, piecing together every fragment of the puzzle. The ledger's power was absolute, binding the villagers to an eternal existence that came at the cost of their freedom, their honesty, and, perhaps, their souls. "Tomorrow," Elara said quietly, "we decide." Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the village in its cold embrace, as if to hold its secrets just a little longer. The edge of revelation had been reached, and the true reckoning was about to begin. The night had settled deep over Eldamore, the fog curling in tendrils around the ancient stone buildings, muffling the usual sounds of the village. Detective Inspector Elara Voss stood outside the weathered door of the village library, her breath visible in the cold air. The faint sound of rain tapping against the leaded glass windows accompanied the low murmur of voices within. She pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside, the scent of old parchment and wood smoke enveloping her. Thomas Graves looked up from a worn leather-bound tome, his round spectacles catching the flicker of the oil lamp beside him. His face, usually reserved and cautious, now bore the weight of conflicted emotions. "Elara," he said quietly, "there are things you need to understand about this village, about what we've all been forced to endure. She gestured to the chair opposite him, settling in with a steady gaze. "Start from the beginning, Thomas. Tell me everything." He hesitated, fingers tracing a faded map of Eldermore's oldest estates. "The pact," he began, voice low, "is more than just a legend. It's the reason our people don't age. But it came at a cost, a price in blood and silence. I've spent years guarding that secret, torn between loyalty to my ancestors and the truth you seek." Alara nodded slowly, her mind piecing together the fragments of whispered stories and ledger entries. "And the ledger? It's a ledger of sins," Thomas replied, "covering up murders, disappearances, and betrayals. I was part of the effort to keep it hidden, to protect the village from itself. But I see now that hiding the truth only breeds more darkness." Before she could respond, the library door creaked open again, and Sophie Whitlock slipped inside, her auburn curls damp from the mist outside. Her bright eyes darted nervously between Ilara and Thomas. "We need to talk," Sophie said hurriedly, pulling Alara aside once Thomas had left. "There's something you don't know. I've been meeting with Margaret." Alara's brow furrowed. "Margaret Langley, the one warning me to stop." Sophie nodded, biting her lip. "She's more involved than anyone realizes. She's been manipulating the village, keeping people loyal to the pact. I thought I could help you, but I'm afraid I've been part of her plan." The betrayal stabbed sharper than the cold mist outside. "Why, Sophie? Why would you do this?" "Because I wanted to protect my family," Sophie whispered, tears glistening. "And because I'm terrified of what revealing the truth would mean for all of us." Ilara placed a steady hand on Sophie's shoulder, the weight of trust and treachery settling heavily between them. "We need to be careful. The truth is dangerous, but so is silence." Later, in the dimly lit back room of the inn, Ilara faced Margaret Langley. The elder woman's serene yet commanding presence filled the space, her pale skin almost glowing in the flickering candlelight. Her silver-streaked hair was pinned back meticulously, her vintage black attire immaculate. "You've come far, detective," Margaret said softly, voice like velvet with steel beneath. "But some stones are better left unturned. The pact has kept this village alive, preserved its harmony. Exposing it would unravel everything, not just for Eldermore, but for you as well." Alara's eyes burned with determination. Keeping people imprisoned in lies is no harmony. There's a cost to this immortality, and it's time the village paid it honestly. Margaret's gaze hardened. "And what if that cost is too high? What if the truth destroys us all?" Their voices lowered to fierce whispers, the tension crackling like a storm about to break. As the confrontation simmered, Father Benedict observed quietly from the shadows of the church, his expression grave. The village's fractures were deepening, and with each betrayal, the moral weight of the secret pressed heavier on the community. He understood the pain of silence, the burden of unspoken sins. Alara left the inn that night with more questions than answers. The betrayals among those she had hoped to trust, unraveling the fragile threads she was weaving toward the truth. The fog outside seemed thicker, oppressive, as if the village itself was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable reckoning. In the days that followed, alliances shifted unpredictably. Villagers whispered behind closed doors, eyes filled with suspicion and fear. Ilara's investigation had pierced the veil of secrecy, but at what cost? The web of lies and loyalties grew more tangled, and the shadow of danger loomed ever closer. As the chapter closed, Ilara stood once more at the edge of the village, the ledger's secrets heavy in her pack. She knew the next steps would be perilous. The question lingered in the cold air. Who among Eldermore's ageless inhabitants could she truly trust when betrayal hid behind every familiar face? The ledger's pages held more than just records. They held the fate of a village trapped in time. And Alara was determined to see that fate unveiled, no matter the price. Detective Inspector Alara Voss stepped cautiously into the dimly lit parlor of Evelyn Harper's cottage, the widow's ledger resting heavily on the worn oak table between her and Margaret Langley. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and fading wood smoke, a lingering testament to the house's long history. Outside, the fog clung like a shroud, muffling the distant calls of night creatures and isolating the room in a cocoon of silence and shadow. Margaret rose gracefully from her chair, her presence commanding despite the years that should have marked her. Pale skin and silver-streaked dark hair framed a face that bore the serene composure of someone who had seen centuries pass and bore their heavy weight. Her eyes, however, glimmered with a fierce protectiveness, a mother guarding a fragile legacy. Detective Margaret began, her voice calm yet unwavering. "You have come far, unraveling threads that were meant never to be pulled. But you must understand the ledger you hold is not merely a record of inheritances. It is the chronicle of our survival, our curse, and our duty." Elara met her gaze steadily, the familiar fire of determination burning behind her dark eyes. "Survival at what price, Margaret? How many lives, how many betrayals have been sacrificed to keep this secret alive?" Margaret's lips quivered, betraying a momentary crack in her stoic facade. She reached into a nearby drawer, producing a faded, sepia-toned photograph. The edges were worn, the faces of the figures, men and women in austere Victorian attire, with an eerie permanence. "These were the founders of the pact," Margaret said softly, tracing a finger along the image. "They bound themselves and their descendants to a promise immortality in exchange for silence and sacrifice. Each generation has carried this burden, guarding Eldermore against the ravages of time and the outside world." Ilara's fingers tightened around the ledger, the weight of history pressing down on her. "But what of the disappearances? The lies, the fear that stifles this village? Is that the price you speak of?" Margaret's eyes darkened. "Every secret carries a price, detective. We have lost family, friends, and ourselves to preserve this fragile peace. If the secret is exposed, the village will crumble, and with it, the only home we have ever known." A sharp rap at the door announced the presence of Thomas Graves and Sophie Whitlock, who had lingered in the shadows, their expressions taut with tension. Thomas adjusted his round spectacles, his wiry frame tense. "Margaret, Alara," he began cautiously, "this revelation cannot be ignored. The ledger's truth is a double-edged sword. To protect Eldermore, we must choose carefully what to reveal." Sophie stepped forward, her auburn curls framing a face flushed with resolve. "I want to believe there's a way out of this, a path that doesn't end in silence or destruction. But the longer we hide, the more the village suffers." Margaret's gaze flicked between them, the weight of centuries bearing down. "You do not understand the forces you challenge. Immortality is not a gift. It is a chain. One broken link could unleash chaos." Alara's voice cut through the heavy air, resolute and clear. "And yet, silence is complicity. I cannot stand by while lives are sacrificed to preserve a lie. The truth must be faced, no matter the cost." The room seemed to hold its breath as the four stood bound by the ledger's legacy, each grappling with the consequences of revelation and concealment. Outside, the fog thickened, pressing against the windows like the weight of unspoken secrets. Margaret's serene facade cracked at last, a tear glistening on her pale cheek. "Then you leave me no choice. If the truth is to be told, it must come from me. But beware, detective, some truths are darker than the night that envelops Eldermore." Alara nodded, steeling herself for the storm to come. "I am ready." As Margaret began to unravel the pack's darkest chapters, Alara listened. The ledger's pages fluttering in the draft, a fragile bridge between past and future, truth and consequence. The fragile balance of Eldermore hung by a thread, and the reckoning had only just begun. The confrontation in Evelyn Harper's parlour became a crucible, forging new alliances and fracturing old ones. As dawn threatened to break through the lingering fog, Alara realized that the price of truth was not only the village's future, but her own, forever entwined with the widow's ledger and the shadows of The room was cloaked in shadows, the only illumination coming from the flickering candlelight that cast erratic shapes upon the walls of the hidden chamber. Beneath Evelyn Harper's cottage, Detective Inspector Lara Voss carefully opened the ancient ledger. Its leather cover cracked and worn from centuries of handling. The scent of aged parchment filled the air, mingling with the faint musk of dust and forgotten secrets. Her fingers trembled slightly as she traced the faded ink of the final entries. The cryptic script unraveling a story far older and darker than she had ever imagined. Each page bore witness to generations bound by a pact, an unholy agreement forged in desperation, promising immortality to those who dared to embrace it. But the ledger did not speak only of life preserved. It whispered of sacrifices demanded, of blood spilled in shadows, and of sins inherited like a cursed legacy. Ilara's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the village's eerie timelessness and the price paid to sustain it. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like an unseen sentinel, muffling the world beyond. The silence was broken only by the soft rustle of pages and Ilara's measured breaths. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and Margaret Langley stepped inside, her presence commanding yet serene. Her pale skin glowed faintly in the candlelight, silver-streaked hair framing a face etched with centuries of burden. "You've come far, Inspector," Margaret said softly, her voice a blend of warning and weary acceptance. "But some truths are heavier than the fog that blankets Eldermore." Alara rose, meeting Margaret's gaze with unwavering resolve. "The village deserves to know. The cost of this immortality, the ledgerate, cannot remain hidden any longer." Margaret's eyes darkened with sorrow. "Do you understand what you ask? To reveal the ledger is to unravel the delicate balance that holds this place together. The pact is not merely ink on parchment. It is a bond forged in blood and sacrifice. Exposing it could tear Eldermore apart." From the shadows, Thomas Graves emerged, adjusting his round spectacles nervously. "The history we preserve is fragile," he said, his voice wavering. "But truth must find its place, even if it fractures what we hold dear." Sophie Whitlock stepped forward, her auburn curls catching the candlelight. "I want to believe in a future where we aren't prisoners of this secret," she said quietly. "But what if the price of freedom is too high?" The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of their choices settling like the fog outside. Alara closed the ledger gently and faced her companions. "We stand at a crossroads. To protect the secret is to deny justice and perpetuate a lie. To expose it is to risk everything, the village, its people, and perhaps even myself." As the night deepened, the four of them debated, each argument laced with fear, hope, and the aching knowledge that no path was without sacrifice. Ilara's thoughts drifted to her sister, lost to a crime left unsolved, and to the faces of those she'd met in Eldermore, so young, so unchanged, yet haunted by centuries. Morning light filtered weakly through the fog as Alara found herself alone on a hill overlooking the village. The ledger was clasped tightly in her hands, a tangible reminder of the burden she now bore. The mist swirled around her, as if the village itself held its breath, waiting. She whispered to the wind, "What is the right path when all roads lead to pain?" The dawn broke slowly, the first rays of sunlight piercing the veil of fog, casting long shadows over Alara knew her decision would echo through time, shaping the fate of a place where time itself seemed to stand still. And as the ledger's secrets settled into the light, one thing was certain: some mysteries, no matter how deeply buried, demand reckoning. The fog lingered low and heavy over Eldamore, as the village square filled with restless figures. Word had spread swiftly after Elara's bold disclosure of the ledger's darkest secrets. The centuries-old pact once whispered about in cautious tones, now stood laid bare before all, dissolving the fragile veil of ignorance that had long cloaked the village. Voices rose in angry bursts, some demanding answers and justice, others decrying Elaros' intrusion and the shattering of their delicate peace. Margaret Langley, standing with the measured poise of a matriarch, addressed the crowd with serene authority. "This is not merely a secret," she intoned, "but the very foundation of our survival. To expose it recklessly is to invite ruin upon us all." Her words, though calm, ignited a fierce counter from those who had suffered under the weight of silence for too long. Thomas Graves stepped forward, glasses catching the dim light, his voice steady but impassioned. "We cannot live shackled to a past drenched in blood and fear. The ledger's truth is painful, yes, but it is the key to breaking this cycle." The village fractured visibly that evening, with families and friends divided by allegiance. Sophie Whitlock, caught between loyalty to her heritage and the promise of freedom, found herself torn. In the quiet back room of the inn, she confided in Alara, "I want to believe there's a future beyond this fog, beyond these lies. But I fear what we might lose." Alara nodded, understanding the heavy cost of change. Her own heart ached with the memory of her sister's unresolved fate, the relentless pursuit of justice now mirrored in Eldamore's struggle. "Truth is never without sacrifice," she whispered, "but sometimes it's the only way forward." Meanwhile, Father Benedict gathered a small group within the shadowed sanctuary of the village church. His voice, soft yet resolute, wove through the stained glass filtered light. "Sin and secrecy have long been companions here," he said. "Perhaps now, in this fracture, lies the path to redemption or further despair. Only time will tell." As night deepened, Margaret returned to her ancestral home, the weight of her lineage pressing heavily upon her. Gazing out over the village cloaked in mist, her expression was unreadably blend of resignation and steely resolve. The fracture in Eldamore was no mere disagreement. It was a fundamental rupture that threatened to unravel centuries of careful balance. The chapter closed with the village standing on the precipice of an uncertain future, the ledger's secrets having cleaved the community into factions. Alara knew the path ahead would be fraught with danger and heartbreak. Yet, beneath the swirling fog, a faint glimmer of hope remained, a hope that even fractured loyalties might one day find common ground. But as the wind whispered through the ancient oaks, it carried with it the unspoken question: could Eldamore truly endure the storm it had unleashed? Or was this just the beginning of a deeper, darker unraveling? The answers, like the village itself, lay hidden in the mist, waiting to be uncovered. The low murmur of voices barely disturbed the heavy silence that had settled over the village of Eldamore. Detective Inspector Alara Voss sat alone at a corner table in the village pub. the dim glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the worn wooden surface. Her fingers absent-mindedly traced the fragile edges of the widow's ledger, now closed but never truly sealed in her mind. The mist outside pressed heavily against the windows, like a shroud concealing the villager's wounds, both old and new. She stared down at the ledger's cracked leather cover, feeling the weight of the secrets it bore, decades, centuries even, of untold stories and silent sacrifices. The investigation had stripped away Eldermore's quiet veneer, exposing the dark pact that had bound its people through the ages. The pact that had granted them unnatural longevity, but at a cost that no ledger could fully capture. Ilara's thoughts drifted to Margaret Langley, the serene yet formidable guardian of that secret. Their confrontation had left a scar deeper than any physical wound. Margaret's unwavering belief in the necessity of the pact clashed violently with Elara's relentless pursuit of truth and justice. Yet beneath that implacable exterior, Ilara had glimpsed the heavy toll the secret had exacted on Margaret's solar burden of duty and sacrifice that mirrored her own. The village itself seemed to hold its breath. The fractures had begun to show, some villagers withdrawing further into their silence and denial, others tentatively embracing the painful truth. The fragile balance that had kept Eldermore suspended in time was now irrevocably broken. Later, as dusk settled, Margaret stood in the village square, her pale face illuminated by the dying light of day. Around her, a small group of loyal villagers gathered, a silent congregation bound by shared history and fear of the unknown. Her eyes, tired yet resolute, scanned the mist swirling around the ancient stone fountain at the square's center. The secret she had protected for so long was unraveling, and with it, the fragile piece of their eternal existence. Margaret's voice was soft, but carried the weight of generations. This secret, it is both our salvation and our curse. To lose it is to lose ourselves, but to keep it is to live forever in shadow. Across the village, Thomas Graves and Sophie Whitlock found themselves drawn together by the shifting tides. By the old stone well, they spoke in hushed tones, the fog curling around them like a conspirator. Thomas's worn spectacles caught the flickering lamplight as he hesitated, wrestling with the historian's duty to preserve truth and the protector's impulse to shield Eldermore from ruin. "Perhaps," Sophie whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and hope, "there is a way to carry the past without being chained by it, to acknowledge what we are without surrendering to it." Thomas nodded slowly, the lines on his face deepening. "It's a fragile hope, but maybe the only one we have left." As night deepened, Ilara walked the mist-laden lanes, the familiar weight of her trench coat heavy against the chill. The church bells tolled, in the distance, their solemn peals echoing through the fog, marking the passage of hours that seemed meaningless in Eldermore's timeless embrace. Her mind churned with memories of her sister lost to a cold case, of the villagers trapped between eternity and secrecy, and of the cost she now understood too well. Each step was a battle between grief and resolve, doubt and determination. The investigation had changed her irrevocably, peeling back layers of her own guarded heart. The truth she had uncovered was a double-edged sword, a beacon of justice and a harbinger of loss. In the quiet solitude, Ilara allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. The ledger, the pact, the villagers' fates, they were all entwined with her own story of loss and longing. The cost of immortality was not just measured in years, but in the isolation of carrying unbearable truths alone. Her breath formed small clouds in the cold air as she paused beneath an ancient oak. The fog swirled, a living thing cloaking the village in its eternal embrace. Alara knew the path ahead was uncertain and fraught with peril. Yet, beneath the weight of sorrow, a fragile thread of hope stirred, a hope that perhaps, in the wake of revelation, Eldamore could find a new way forward. With one last glance at the shadowed village, she turned toward the dim glow of the distant lights, ready to face whatever the future held. The ledger was closed, but its echoes would linger in the mist, in the hearts of those who remained, and in her own restless soul. And as the fog thickened once more, swallowing the village in silence, Elara's thoughts whispered into the night. Some mysteries never truly end, and some truths demand a lifetime to bear. The fog hung low over Eldamore that morning, a silvery veil muffling the sounds of the waking village. Detective Inspector Elara Voss stood near the chapel steps, watching as the villagers slowly gathered inside. Drawn by Father Benedict's quiet summons, the air was thick with a solemnity that had settled over Eldamore since the revelations of the ledger and the pact had come to light. It was a moment suspended between past and future, the weight of centuries pressing upon every breath. Inside the chapel, the stained glass windows painted fragments of color across the worn wooden pews. Father Benedict's voice was steady but heavy as he spoke of mortality and grace, contrasting sharply with the villagers' unnatural stasis. His words wove a tapestry of acceptance and surrender, urging the villagers to find peace in the truth, however difficult it might be. Faces reflected the myriad ways each soul grappled with the knowledge. Some bowed their heads in prayerful silence, others stared ahead, eyes glazed with unspoken pain. Elara felt a pang of empathy. This place, so trapped by its own secrets, was now trying to breathe anew. She knew all too well the cost of hidden truths, the scars they left beneath composed facades. Later, the warm glow of the inn's hearth offered a stark contrast to the chill outside. Sophie Whitlock sat across from Elara, the fire's flicker illuminating her curls and the tentative hope in her eyes. "I want to believe we can move on," Sophie confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "But change scares people here. The pact was their anchor, their curse, and their shield. Without it, what are we?" Elara nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes the hardest part isn't the truth itself, but living with what comes next." Sophie's gaze drifted toward the window where the village square lay shrouded in mist. "I want Eldamore to be more than this fog and these secrets. Maybe now it can be." Away from the warmth of the inn, Margaret Langley stood solitary at the riverbank. The mist curled around her like a shroud, and the fractured reflection in the rippling water mirrored the fractures within her soul. Centuries had passed since our ancestor first bound the village to the pact, and though she had borne the burden with a serene composure, the cost was etched deeply in her pale face. She was the guardian of a legacy that was both a blessing and a curse, and now, with the secret laid bare, she faced an uncertain future. In the village square, beneath the sprawling branches of the ancient oak, Thomas Graves gathered, a modest assembly. His voice carried the weight of history as he recounted the origins of the pact, his words imbued with both reverence for tradition and regret for the sacrifices made. The fog wove around them like whispered memories, binding the present to the past. Some villagers listened with guarded hope, others with wary skepticism, but all were touched by the tentative possibility of change. Elara observed the scene, noting the fragile threads weaving a new tapestry of community. The villagers were no longer prisoners of silence. The secret was out, and with it came the chance for healing or for deeper wounds. That evening, as the mist thickened and shadows lengthened, Elara stood alone on a narrow lane leading out of Eldamore. The ledger's pages, once a cipher of hidden crimes and dark pacts, now felt like a map toward an uncertain dawn. She thought of Margaret's lonely vigil by the river, of Sophie's flickering hope, and of Thomas's cautious optimism. The village was changing, but the echoes of immortality would linger in the fog, a reminder that some secrets, once unearthed, reveal not just the past, but the fragile, uneasy future. Alara tucked her notebook away, her breath visible in the cold air. She knew her departure was imminent, but part of her would remain here, caught in the silent dance of time that Eldamore embodied. As the first light broke through the mist, she took one last look back. The village, a silhouette of shadow and light, mystery and memory. The ledger was closed, but its story was far from over. The early morning mist clung stubbornly to the crooked rooftops of Eldamore, as Detective Inspector Alara Voss stood silently at the village's outskirts. The fog, that perpetual shroud that had wrapped the village in timelessness, was beginning to thin, revealing the ancient stones and thatched eaves she had come to know so well during her stay. A chill wind whispered through the skeletal branches of the oaks lining the narrow lane, carrying the earthy scent of damp moss and wood smoke from distant chimneys. Alara pulled her trench coat tighter around her, the weight of the last weeks pressing down on her shoulders like the fog itself. She gazed back once more at the village, this place, suspended between centuries, where no one seemed to age past 40, where secrets were etched not just in a ledger but into the very air. Inside the village, in the dim glow of a dying fire flickered across the worn wooden beams, Sophie Whitlock moved quietly among the scattered belongings she had hastily packed into a battered suitcase. Her auburn curls caught the pale light as she paused, glancing toward the coat rack where Ilaros' trench coat still hung. The murmur of early risers blended with the crackling hearth, a soft backdrop to the tension that had settled like a storm cloud over the room. Sophie's eyes held a mixture of hope and fear. She longed to escape Eldamore's suffocating traditions, but feared what the future might hold beyond its borders. Alara entered the inn, her footsteps muffled by the thick rugs. Sophie looked up, offering a tentative smile. "Leaving so soon?" she asked softly. "I have to," Alara replied, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "This place, it's not like any other. The secrets here, they're heavy." Sophie nodded, setting down a bundle of clothes. "I'll miss you," she admitted, "even if this village tries to keep us all trapped in its fog." Their brief exchange was interrupted by the quiet arrival of Margaret Langley. The ageless woman moved with an ethereal grace, her silver-streaked hair catching the firelight as she approached. Her presence was commanding yet serene, a living testament to the village's dark pact. "You're leaving," Margaret said, her voice a low murmur, almost blending with the crackling fire. Alara met her gaze steadily. "Yes, but not without understanding what I've uncovered." Margaret's eyes softened for a moment, betraying the weight of centuries of duty and sacrifice. "Eldamore is a fragile balance," she said. "The secrets we keep are not just lies, they are lifelines. But at what cost?" Alara challenged. "How many lives have been trapped by this endless cycle?" Margaret's expression darkened, though her tone remained calm. "More than you can imagine. But some things are too dangerous to expose." Their conversation lingered between them, thick with unspoken truths and the understanding that neither would walk away unchanged. Outside, the first pale light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting long shadows across the cobbled streets. Later, as Alara made her way down the narrow path leading away from the village, Thomas Graves fell into step beside her. His wiry frame was silhouetted against the soft glow of the morning. Spectacles perched on his nose, reflecting the emerging light. "You've stirred the village," Thomas said quietly. "Some want to face the truth, Others fear it will unravel everything. Alara glanced at him, grateful for his companionship despite the weight of his own conflicted loyalties. "And what about you?" He sighed, his gaze distant. "I've lived with these stories all my life. The ledger, the pact, they are part of Eldermore's soul. But maybe it's time for that soul to breathe." The church bells tolled faintly in the distance, a solemn cadence to their farewell. Alara felt the ache of departure mingled with the fragile hope that perhaps change was possible, even in a village trapped by time. As the mist finally lifted, revealing the path ahead, Alara took a deep breath. The road beyond Eldermore was uncertain and uncharted, but she carried with her the burden and the knowledge of a truth that might one day set others free or doom them to the same endless twilight. The widow's ledger was closed, but its legacy lingered like the fading fog-whispering secrets that would never fully disappear. And as Alara disappeared down the winding road, the village settled into a new, uneasy peace. The eternal dance between light and shadow continuing in the heart of Eldermore. The train lurched forward with a slow, reluctant rumble, wheels clattering against the aged tracks that stretched like veins through the morning mist. Detective Inspector Alara Voss sat by the window, her gaze lost in the swirling fog that clung to the English countryside like a shroud. The soft, muted light of dawn filtered through the glass, casting pale shadows across her face, etching the fatigue and contemplation that had settled deep into her sharp features. Eldermore, the village that had consumed her thoughts for weeks, was now a hazy silhouette fading behind her, its secrets tangled in the dense mist, as if the very air sought to conceal the truths buried within. Her fingers traced the worn leather cover of her notebook, the small talisman she had carried since her arrival. Inside, the pages were densely packed with cryptic entries, sketches, and fragments of overheard whispers, a testament to the labyrinthine mystery she had unraveled. Each note was a thread in the tapestry of Eldermore's dark legacy inheritance disputes, forgotten crimes, and the unnatural pact that had ensnared the villagers in a timeless existence. The burden of knowledge weighed heavily on her, pressing against her chest like the stagnant fog that clung to the village streets. Ilare's thoughts drifted back to the final confrontation with Margaret Langley, the ageless guardian of Eldermore's secret. Margaret's serene yet unyielding presence had embodied the village's burden, the price of immortality etched into every wrinkle she refused to bear. Their exchange had been a collision of ideals. Ilara's relentless pursuit of truth clashing against Margaret's fierce dedication to preserving a fragile peace at any cost. The tension in Margaret's voice, the subtle quiver beneath her composed exterior, lingered in Ilara's mind like a haunting melody. "You don't understand," Margaret had whispered, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of sorrow and steely resolve. "This secret is all we have left. Without it, Eldermore dies." Ilara had heard the desperation beneath the words, the sacrifices made to maintain a semblance of life that defied the natural order. Yet she could not reconcile the price the lives lost, the lies perpetuated, the eternal silence demanded by the ledger's shadows. The choice she had faced was agonizing: expose the truth and shatter the village's fragile equilibrium, or shield the secret and live with the weight of compromised justice. Now, as the train carried her away from Eldermore's mist-enshrouded streets, Ilara wrestled with the aftermath. The village's paradox haunted Hertha, blessing and curse of immortality. The corrosive nature of secrets whispered through generations, the isolation born from silence. She pondered her own past losses, the ghost of her sister's unsolved fate echoing in the ledger's forgotten crimes. Justice had been her compass, yet here, in this place where time stood still, justice had taken on a new, complicated meaning. Outside the window, the countryside blurred into a watercolor of grey and green, the fog-weaving tendrils that reached out like fingers to touch the earth. The world beyond Eldamore seemed vast and mutable, a stark contrast to the village's eternal stillness. Alara allowed herself a moment of vulnerability, a sigh escaping her lips, mingling with the murmurs of other passengers and the rhythmic clatter of the train. Her journey was not merely a physical departure, but a passage through the labyrinth of her own convictions. Could she ever truly leave behind the secrets she had unearthed? Would the Ledger's shadow follow her, a silent companion in the quiet corners of her mind? As the miles stretched ahead, so too did the questions that would shape her future. The weight of truth was a paradox both liberating and imprisoning. Ilara's resolve hardened amidst the melancholy, a quiet promise to carry forward the lessons etched in Eldamore's fog. The ledger was closed behind her, but its echoes lingered, a reminder that some mysteries refused to fade, their whispers carried forever on the breath of the mist. And so, as the train vanished into the horizon, Elara Voss faced the unknown with a heart tempered by sorrow, a mind sharpened by revelation, and a spirit forever changed by the village where time had stopped but the past was never truly gone. The road ahead was uncertain, but one truth remained clear: justice, like the mist, would find a way to settle, even in the shadow of eternity. The final notes of the journey hummed softly in the carriage as Elara turned once more to her notebook, pen poised to capture the reflections that would shape the chapters yet unwritten. The mystery of Eldamore had ended, but her story, her search for meaning beyond the ledger's pages, was only just beginning. With a steady breath, she looked forward, the veil of mist parting slowly to reveal the first tentative rays of a new dawn. The fog hung so thick over Eldamore that when Detective Inspector Elara Voss stepped onto the cobbled streets, she felt as if the very air conspired to swallow her whole. The village, with its quaint stone cottages and narrow alleyways, seemed suspended in time. What struck her most was not the ancient architecture, but the faces she passed each one, seemingly untouched by the decades that must have passed. Not a wrinkle disturbed their smooth skin, nor a strand of grey marred their dark hair. It was an unsettling sight, one she couldn't shake as she began her inquiries. Her first interviews were with villagers who greeted her with polite smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. There was a practiced civility here, as if every word was carefully measured, every glance calculated. Elara noted it, all the slight hesitation before answering, the subtle shifts in posture when she pressed too hard. A pattern was emerging, one of guardedness and a shared secret. Thomas Graves, the village historian, was her next visit. His studies smelled of old paper and wood smoke, a comforting aroma, but one that belied the tension in the room. He greeted her with a reserved nod, his round spectacles catching the firelight as he gestured toward the ledger she carried. "The ledger," he said softly, "is more than a record of inheritances. It's a tapestry of our village's history, woven with threads of loyalty and betrayal." Elara listened intently as Thomas recounted whispered stories passed down through generations, tales of a murder long buried, a crime never fully solved. His voice faltered when he spoke of the families involved, hinting at names that still held sway in Eldamore's delicate hierarchy. "But some things are better left in the shadows," he warned, eyes darting to the window where the fog pressed against the glass like a living thing. Later, at the village inn, Sophie Whitlock served Elara tea with trembling hands. The warmth of the cup was a stark contrast to the cold dread settling in Elara's gut. Sophie's bright eyes flickered between curiosity and fear. "There are stories," she whispered, "things no outsider should hear." Despite her reluctance, Sophie shared snippets of gossip, half-remembered conversations, strange disappearances, the eerie permanence of youth. Ilara pieced together fragments that painted a picture far more complex than a simple murder mystery. Her encounter with James Marlowe, the blacksmith, was markedly different. His broad frame and soot-streaked face were the embodiment of the village's stubbornness. When Ilara pressed him about the ledger and the village's secrets, his response was a curt refusal, his hammer striking the anvil with force that echoed his defiance. "Best you mind your own business, Inspector," he growled. "Eldermore's seen enough trouble without outsiders stirring the pot." The villagers' resistance only deepened Ilara's resolve. She knew the ledger was the key, but its cryptic entries required patience and courage to unravel. As she walked back through the fog-shrouded streets, the whispers of the past seemed to swirl around her, beckoning and warning in equal measure. In the dim light of her room at the inn, Ilara spread the ledger's pages before her. The names, dates, and notes danced in the flickering candlelight. Each entry hinted at secrets long buried beneath the village's serene surface. She traced a finger over a passage that mentioned a sudden disappearance, coinciding with a disputed inheritance, an event that felt less like history and more like a warning. Her thoughts were interrupted by a tap at the door. It was Sophie, her expression taut but resolute. "I want to help," she said quietly. "There are things you need to know, things I can show you, but you have to be careful." Ilara nodded, the weight of the village pressing down on her shoulders. The ledger was not just a book. It was a map to a truth that some would kill to protect. And in Eldermore, where no one aged past 40, the past was never truly past. The fog clung stubbornly to the earth as Detective Inspector Ilara Voss took her final steps away from Eldermore. The village that had ensnared her in a web of secrets so intricate and ancient that even the mists seemed to whisper of their weight. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and fading wood smoke, a scent that would forever be etched in her memory, mingled now with the bitter tang of loss and revelation. She paused at the crest of the hill overlooking the village, the dim outlines of the houses blurred by the ever-present fog. Eldermore looked as it always had, quaint, timeless, untouched by the passage of years. Yet beneath its placid surface, a tumult of truths had been unearthed, shaking the foundations of the village's fragile existence. In her hands she carried the ledger, the widow's ledgered leather cover, worn but resolute. The pages within, heavy with the weight of history and silence. It was more than a record of inheritances. It was a repository of the village's sins, its bargains with death, and the dark pact that had kept its people suspended in an endless present. Behind her, the rustle of footsteps signaled the approach of Margaret Langley. The woman's presence was as graceful and unyielding as ever, her silver-streaked hair a stark contrast to the somber black of her vintage attire. She moved with the quiet dignity of someone who carried centuries on her shoulders, yet bore them with a serene strength. "You're leaving," Margaret said softly, her voice carrying the calm of a guardian who had watched over Eldermore through countless storms. Ilara nodded, folding the ledger carefully. "I have too. The truth is out now, and the village will never be the same." Margaret's eyes held a flicker of something regret, perhaps, or acceptance. Truth is a heavy burden. Some truths heal, others wound. Eldermore has borne both. The detective looked back at the village, feeling the thrum of lives intertwined with secrets too deep to fully unravel. "Do you think they'll be able to live with it?" A faint smile touched Margaret's lips. "They have no choice. The ledger is closed, but its shadows remain. The past does not easily release its hold." As the fog thickened, swallowing the two women into its embrace, Ilara turned away and began her walk down the hill. Each step felt like leaving behind a part of herself, the relentless pursuit. The doubts, the glimpses of immortality's cost etched into every face she'd met. Back in the village square, Thomas Graves and Sophie Whitlock stood side by side, the weight of recent revelations heavy in their eyes. Thomas adjusted his spectacles, his gaze distant yet thoughtful, while Sophie's bright eyes flickered with a newfound resolve, tempered by the cautious hope of change. "It's not the end," Thomas murmured, "but a beginning." Sophie nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "A beginning that might finally let us breathe." Yet even as they spoke, the fog wound its tendrils through the empty streets, cloaking the village in its eternal shroud. The silence was profound, almost reverent, as if Eldamore itself held its breath, watching, waiting, guarding the secrets that had marked its existence for centuries. Ilara's journey away from the village was quiet, the rhythmic crunch of gravel beneath her boots the only sound breaking the stillness. Her thoughts wandered to the ledger's final entries, the faces of those who had lived and died without aging, the price they had paid for their unnatural longevity. The case was closed, the ledger secured, but the questions lingered like the Foggin scene, persistent and impossible to fully dispel. What cost did immortality demand? Could justice ever be served in a place where time itself seemed to falter? And as Ilara glanced back one last time, the village swallowed by the mists, she knew some mysteries were destined never to end. The widow's ledger was closed, but Eldamore's story was far from over. With a final breath of the damp, heavy air, Ilara Voss stepped forward into the unknown, carrying with her the relentless ache of truth and the haunting memory of a village caught forever in time. Detective Inspector Ilara Voss sat alone at the small wooden table in the dimly lit corner of the village library. The brittle pages of the widow's ledger spread before her like a map of secrets. The faint flickering light of an oil lamp cast shadows that danced across the room's ancient oak shelves, their spines whispering tales of Eldamore's long-forgotten past. As she leaned closer, the faint scent of aged parchment and dust mingled with the damp chill that seeped through the stone walls. Her eyes narrowed on a particular entry, its ink faded but still legible, a date from over a century ago, alongside the names of two prominent village families. The entry was strangely sparse compared to others. There was an abrupt break in the ledger's usual meticulous detail, as if someone had deliberately erased or omitted significant information. Ilara's pulse quickened. This was no mere record of inheritance. It was a carefully crafted silence, a void meant to conceal. The ledger's cryptic nature gnawed at her, urging her to seek answers beyond the written word. She knew she needed help understanding the village's tangled history, so she turned to the one person who might know its every nuance. Thomas Graves, the village historian. Thomas's study was a small sanctuary cluttered with books, maps, and faded photographs. The scent of old paper was stronger here, mixing with the faint aroma of pipe tobacco. Thomas himself sat behind his desk, adjusting his round spectacles as Ilara entered. His wiry frame seemed smaller in the dim room, shadows emphasizing the furrow in his brow. "Detective," he greeted her with a wary nod. "I assume you want to talk about the ledger again." Ilara didn't waste time. "There's an entry here that doesn't add up. It suggests a cover-up, something was deliberately left out." Thomas sighed deeply, rubbing his hands together in nervous agitation. "You're not the first to notice. But Eldamore's history is layered with secrets. Some truths, I fear, are better left buried." "Better left buried?" Ilara's voice was steady but edged with disbelief. "How can justice be served if we ignore the past?" He looked away, his eyes distant. I was raised to protect this village, to keep its legacy intact. But the ledger, it's a burden. I wrestle with whether revealing the truth would save us or destroy us. Their conversation hung heavy in the air, a fragile bridge between duty and conscience. Later that evening, Elara found herself at the village inn, a warm glow spilling from its windows into the fog. Inside, the hearth crackled, casting dancing flames that flickered over the faces of a few locals. Sophie Whitlock sat nearby, her auburn curls catching the firelight, eyes bright yet shadowed with unspoken fears. Sophie's voice was low as she leaned closer. "Elara, I've lived here all my life. I've heard the whispers about the ledger, the pact, the things we're all supposed to forget. But I can't stay. This village, it's suffocating. There's no future here, only the same faces, the same stories, over and over." Elara nodded, understanding the weight of Sophie's words. "What would you do if you were free of it all?" "Leave," Sophie said simply, her voice barely above a whisper. "Find a place where time moves forward, not stands still." The conversation deepened Elara's resolve, but also stirred a quiet sorrow. How many lives had been quietly imprisoned by Eldermore's secrets? That night, as the wind howled outside, rattling the window panes of her temporary lodgings, Elara sat by the window, the ledger open on her lap. The fog outside thickened, swallowing the village in a ghostly embrace. Shadows loomed larger, and the weight of the uncovered secrets pressed down on her chest. The cover-up hinted in the ledger was not just a matter of record, it was a fracture in the village's foundation, a wound that threatened to bleed truth into the shadows. Elara knew the path ahead would be perilous, with allies uncertain and enemies hidden in plain sight. Yet the truth called to her with an irresistible insistence, pulling her deeper into Eldermore's dark heart. As the candle flickered and the mist pressed against the window, Elara whispered to herself, "No secret stays buried forever." And with that, the night closed in, thick with promise and peril, as the village's past began to unravel beneath the weight of its own silence. The morning air hung thick with fog as Detective Inspector Elara Voss made her way toward the quaint cottage at the edge of Eldermore. The village was wrapped in its usual shroud of mist, the familiar dampness seeping into her bones despite the brisk autumn chill. A heavy silence blanketed the streets, broken only by the occasional drip of moisture from the eaves overhead. Elara's boots crunched softly against the scattered leaves littering the narrow path, each step echoing her growing sense of unease. Her destination was the home of George Mallory, a man well regarded in the village and one she had come to consider a reliable source in her early inquiries. Yet today, the cottage stood deserted, windows dark, door locked tight, and no sign of life. George had vanished without a trace. Elara crouched beside the garden gate, noting the undisturbed earth and the absence of footprints other than her own. The door showed no sign of forced entry, and yet the stillness inside was unsettling. Had George fled, or had something more sinister taken him away? The ledger's cryptic entries and the villagers' guarded responses now seemed to deepen into a tangible threat. Back in the village hall, Elara found herself amid a gathering of Eldermore's residents, their faces pale and eyes flickering with suspicion and fear. The air was thick with whispered conjecture and hurried glances. Thomas Graves, the village historian, stood quietly near the back, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his spectacles. His usual reserve gave way to a rare display of anxiety, a flicker of worry crossing his lined face. "Elara," Thomas murmured when she approached. George was one of the last who dared to ask questions. "His disappearance, it's no coincidence." Sophie Whitlock, The innkeeper's daughter hovered nearby, her bright eyes shadowed by worry. "People are scared," she said softly. "They're afraid what you might uncover. It's not just about George, there's something buried here, something they want to keep hidden." Before Elara could respond, a hush fell over the room as a striking figure entered. Margaret Langley moved with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly, her pale skin and silver-streaked hair catching the faint light. Dressed in vintage black, she exuded a serene but commanding presence that stilled the room. "Elara Voss." Margaret's voice was calm, yet laced with unmistakable authority. "You tread on dangerous ground. Eldermore's peace depends on its secrets remaining buried." Elara met Margaret's gaze without flinching. The truth must come to light, no matter the cost. Margaret's eyes darkened for a fleeting moment, then softened with a hint of sorrow. "Beware, detective. Some truths demand a price too high to pay." The warning hung in the air as Margaret turned and glided out, leaving a ripple of unease in her wake. That evening, Elara met Sophie in the quiet confines of the inn's back room. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows against the worn wooden walls. Sophie's voice was barely above a whisper. "I want to help you, Elara. But the village, it's not just a place. It's a pact, a burden we all carry. George's disappearance, it's a message, a warning to stop digging." Elara's jaw tightened. "I can't turn away now, Sophie. Not when so much depends on uncovering the truth." Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the village in a cold embrace. The line between ally and adversary blurred as fear and loyalty wove an intricate web around Eldamore. Elara's investigation had crossed a threshold, and the shadows of the past were beginning to stir with restless intent. As the night deepened, so did the mystery, and Elara knew that the vanishing of George Mallory was only the beginning. Somewhere beyond the mist, the village's darkest secrets waited to be revealed, but at what cost? The silence of Eldamore was no longer peaceful. It was a warning, and Elara was listening. Detective Inspector Elara Voss sat alone in the dimly lit corner of Eldamore's village library, the only sanctuary where she could spread out the fragile, yellowed pages of the widow's ledger. The fog pressed heavily against the tall, stained glass windows, dulling the outside world to a muted grey, muffling the usual clatter of village life. Here, in this hush, the ledger whispered its secret cryptic entries of inheritances, dates, and names that blurred the boundaries of time. The ink had faded unevenly, as if deliberately resisting the passage of years. Much like the villagers themselves, who refused to age beyond 40. Eliara's eyes scanned the ledger, tracing a pattern that gnawed at the edges of her reason. Several entries detailed inheritances that seemed impossible properties and possessions, passing hands across decades without clear heirs, some names recurring in different centuries as if the same person lived multiple lifetimes. Her fingers paused on an entry marked with a faint, nearly illegible note: "Dispute resolved, blood price paid." The words sent a chill down her spine. The silence was broken by a soft knock at the heavy oak door. Elara looked up to see Margaret Langley, the village's enigmatic guardian of secrets, standing framed by the dusky light. Margaret's pale skin gleamed faintly, her silver-streaked dark hair falling in elegant waves over a vintage black dress that seemed a relic from another era. Her serene expression bore no hint of warmth. "Detective Voss," Margaret began, her voice smooth and unwavering, "there are truths in Eldamore that are better left undisturbed. The ledger is not just a record, it is a covenant. I advise you to cease your inquiries before you upset the delicate balance we have maintained for centuries." Elara met Margaret's steady gaze, refusing to be cowed. The people of this village deserve to know the truth. I intend to find it, no matter the cost. Margaret's lips curved into a faint, almost sorrowful smile. Then you must be prepared for the consequences. Later that evening, Elara sought out Thomas Graves and Sophie Whitlock in the village square. Thomas, the historian, was a wiry man with round spectacles perched precariously on his nose and a tweed jacket that smelled faintly of old books. Sophie, the innkeeper's daughter, stood beside him, her curly auburn hair catching the dim light as her bright eyes darted nervously around the square. They exchanged a glance heavy with unspoken tension before Thomas spoke in a low voice. "Eldermore has its ways, detective. The ledger is more than a book, it's a legacy. Dig too deep, and you risk unraveling more than just the past." Sophie's voice trembled slightly as she added, "Some secrets protect us, others imprison us." Elara nodded, feeling the weight of their words settle into her bones. The villagers' protectiveness was not merely stubbornness. It was fear of what the truth might unleash. The following days were a careful dance between discovery and discretion. At the village pub, Elara observed groups of villagers whose laughter was hollow, their eyes darting with suspicion whenever she approached. Conversations hushed, and glances flicked away as if she carried an invisible mark. The jovial atmosphere was a thin veneer stretched taut over simmering tension. One night, as rain pattered against the windows of her rented cottage, Elara returned to the ledger. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became. The ledger was not only a record of wealth, but a ledger of lives extended unnaturally. Trades made in shadows, and blood debts paid in silence. The inheritance disputes were not mere family squabbles, but battles for a secret that granted the impossible immortality at a terrible cost. Yet, with each step closer to the truth, the village seemed to shrink away from her. Doors once open tightened shut. Friends became strangers. The ledger, a fragile book of paper and ink, had awakened something far more formidable, a collective will to protect what should have been buried. Elara's resolve hardened. She would not be deterred, even as the fog thickened and the village's protective silence grew more suffocating. Beneath Eldermore's picturesque facade, a darkness thrived, and she was determined to bring it to light. But Margaret's warning echoed in her mind. Some truths come with a price, and in Eldermore, that price might be more than Elara was willing to pay. As the night deepened, Elara closed the ledger and looked out into the swirling mist that clung to the village's ancient stone walls. Somewhere beneath the surface, the secret waiting for her to uncover it, or for her to be swallowed by the shadows that guarded it. With a final glance at the fading candlelight, Elara whispered to herself, "No more hiding." Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the village in silence once again, as Eldermore held its breath. The evening fog clung obstinately to the crooked rooftops of Eldermore, as Detective Inspector Elara Voss stood in the quiet, cluttered sitting room of Evelyn Harper's old cottage. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, wood smoke, and something faintly metallic that Elara couldn't immediately place. Her fingers hovered over a loose floorboard near the hearth, a subtle irregularity she had noticed during her earlier meticulous search. With a shallow breath, she pried the board aside, revealing a narrow, dust-choked staircase descending into darkness. The house seemed to hold its breath as she pulled a small flashlight from her coat pocket, clicking it on with a soft snap. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating the steep steps that disappeared into a cramped cellar below. The silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the distant creak of settling wood and the soft whisper of the fog pressing against the window panes. Elara's heart beat steadily, calm, methodical, but charged with the thrill of discovery. She descended carefully, each footfall muffled by decades of dust and neglect. At the bottom, the air was colder, damp and stale, wrapping around her like a shroud. Against one wall stood a sturdy wooden table, layered thick with dust and strewn with the detritus of a forgotten life, brittle parchments, faded photographs, and a small leather-bound book with a cracked spine. Kneeling, Alara swept away decades of dust with the sleeve of her coat, revealing elegant, looping handwriting on the yellowed parchment. The pages told a story that sent a chill racing down her spine, an account of a pact, forged centuries ago, between the village's founding families. A pact promising escape from death itself, a form of immortality granted in exchange for a price too terrible to name outright. The ledger entries matched the names and dates, connecting generations of villagers who had vanished without explanation, replaced by others who bore the same youthful faces year after year. Her breath hitched as she unfolded a faded photograph showing a group of stern-faced villagers, their eyes unnervingly familiar. She recognized Margaret Langley among them, her ageless face serene and inscrutable even in the black and white image. The weight of the revelation settled heavily on Ilara's shoulders. The village's eerie timelessness was no mere coincidence, it was a curse, a carefully guarded secret maintained through silence and shadows. She understood now why the villagers had been so protective, so fearful of her questions. The ledger was more than a record, it was a chain binding them all. Suddenly, a creak echoed from the floorboards above, sharp and deliberate. Alara froze, the beam of her flashlight trembling slightly in her grip. Footsteps, soft, measured, approaching. Someone knew she was here. Her pulse quickened as she packed the parchments carefully into her bag. The game had changed. The watchers of Eldermore were closing in. She ascended the stairs with cautious speed, the fog outside swirling like a living entity, cloaking the cottage in its spectral embrace. Ilara's mind raced with questions and fears. How many had paid the price of this pact? How many more lives lay buried beneath the surface of this quaint village? As she stepped back into the sitting room, the door creaked open slowly, and a shadow loomed in the threshold. Ilara's eyes met those of Margaret Langley, whose pale face was framed by silver-streaked dark hair, her gaze both calm and commanding. "You should not have come here," Margaret said softly, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. Ilara swallowed hard, the enormity of the secret pressing down on her like the fog outside. "I need to know the truth," she replied, steady despite the growing dread. Margaret's eyes gleamed with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. "Some truths are too dangerous to reveal. The price of immortality is paid in silence and sacrifice." The room seemed to close in around Alara as the reality of Eldermore's legacy settled over her. She stood at the precipice of a truth that could shatter the fragile peace or doom them all to live in shadows forever. With a final, lingering look, Margaret stepped back into the night, the door clicking shut behind her. Ilara was left alone, heart pounding, the ledger's ancient secrets burning in her hands. Outside, the fog deepened, swallowing the village whole. Somewhere in the darkness, unseen eyes watched and waited. The pact had been revealed, but the story was far from over. Detective Inspector Ilara Voss found herself seated in the dim back room of the village inn, the soft glow of a single candle flickering against the peeling wallpaper. Outside, the rain whispered against the window panes, its rhythm steady but unpredictable, much like the secrets she sought to uncover in Eldermore. Opposite her, Sophie Whitlock shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her auburn curls catching the candlelight as she leaned forward, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I don't like all this, Elara, Sophie confessed, eyes darting toward the door as if expecting shadows to creep in. People here guard their secrets the way some guard their lives. But you ask questions, dangerous questions. Elara nodded, her sharp gaze steady, and those questions might be the only way out. But I need help. You've heard things, stories, rumors, anything that might connect the ledger to what's really happening here. Sophie hesitated, biting her lower lip before speaking. There's talk, quiet talk, about old debts and bloodlines, about the pact your ledger hints at, but most are too afraid to say it outright. They fear Margaret Langley. She's like a shadow that never leaves this place. The name hung heavy in the room, a palpable weight that even the flickering candles seemed reluctant to disturb. Later that evening, Elara found herself in the study of Thomas Graves, a room thick with the musk of aged paper and worn leather. Shelves bowed under the weight of dusty tomes and brittle manuscripts, each a testament to the village's long and tangled history. Thomas adjusted his round spectacles and regarded Elara with a mixture of caution and reluctant respect. "You're asking the questions no one else dares," he said quietly. "But knowledge here is double-edged. It can free or destroy. I've spent years balancing on that edge." Elara leaned forward, voice low. "What can you tell me about the ledger entries that suggest a cover-up? About the villagers who might still be living with ghosts from centuries past?" Thomas sighed, a tremor of conflict flickering through his eyes. "There are those who believe the secret is a necessary sacrifice. Others see it as a curse. I'm torn between my duty to protect our legacy and the truth you seek. But you deserve to know more." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden knock, firm, deliberate. The door creaked open, revealing Margaret Langley standing with serene authority, her pale face framed by silver-streaked hair. The room seemed to chill instantly. "Detective," Margaret said smoothly, her voice as calm as the fog outside. "You tread on dangerous ground. Eldermore is not a place for prying eyes. You must cease this investigation, for your own good and for the villagers." Elara met her gaze unwaveringly. "I'm here because there are truths that can no longer be hidden, secrets that have held this village captive for too long." Margaret's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. "Some truths come at too high a price." As Margaret left, the tension in the room lingered, thick as the fog that pressed against the windows. Later, walking through the mist-cloaked streets, Elara felt the weight of the villagers' watchful eyes. The church bells tolled in the distance, a haunting reminder of time's passage, or lack thereof, in Eldermore. She knew the path ahead was fraught with peril. Alliances were fragile, and adversaries powerful. Yet, in the uneasy partnership forged with Sophie and Thomas, Elara glimpsed a slender thread of hope. The ledger's secrets beckoned, and the delicate balance of the village's future hung in the balance. With a steadying breath, Elara pulled her trench coat tighter and disappeared deeper into the fog, determined to unravel the darkness that had long enveloped Eldermore. The village hall, usually a place of quiet town meetings and gentle debates, now buzzed with a charged atmosphere. Elara stood near the center, her sharp eyes scanning the diverse faces turned toward her, some curious, others hostile. The fog outside seeped through the stained glass windows, casting muted colors that danced over the gathered crowd like ghostly warnings. "This ledger," Elara began, holding the worn book aloft, "is not merely a record of inheritances. It is a testament to secrets that have shaped Eldermore for centuries. To deny its significance is to deny the truth that binds this village together and holds it prisoner." A murmur rippled through the audience, quickly swelling into voices raised in protest. Thomas Graves stepped forward, adjusting his round spectacles nervously. "Detective Voss," he said cautiously, "many here believe that some truths are best left buried. The ledger is more than paper and ink. It is a legacy of pain, sacrifice, and survival. To expose it fully could unravel the very fabric of our community." Ilara nodded, understanding the weight of his words, but resolute. "I am here to uncover the facts, not to judge. But silence has allowed injustice and fear to fester. We cannot move forward without confronting what lies beneath this fog." From the back of the room, a figure rose, graceful and composed, with a presence that commanded attention despite the tension. Margaret Langley's pale face was serene, yet her eyes flickered with a warning fire. "Detective," she said softly, her voice cutting through the din, "you tread on dangerous ground. Eldermore's peace is fragile, maintained by trust and unspoken understandings. If you continue down this path, you risk not only your safety but the destruction of everything we have preserved." Ilara met Margaret's gaze steadily. "I respect your desire to protect the village, but protection built on deception can only last so long. The Ledger's secrets cannot remain hidden forever." A hush fell over the room as the reality of the conflict crystallized. Allies and adversaries took subtle sides. Whispers began to spread like wildfire. Sophie Whitlock, standing beside Thomas, bit her lip anxiously, her usual bright eyes clouded with worry. "This isn't what I imagined when I hoped to find the truth," she whispered to Thomas. "I fear what this division will do to us all." Thomas sighed, his wiry frame tense. "We are caught between preserving a legacy and embracing a future. Neither path is free of sacrifice." Later, as the meeting disbanded, Ilara found herself alone in the village in the walls, heavy with the scent of damp wood and burning peat. She stared out the fogged window, the mist swirling like memories she could not shake. The weight of her sister's unsolved fate pressed against her chest, mingling with the burden of Eldermore's dark past. Her fingers trembled as tears welled in her eyes. "I can't fail here," she whispered to the cold night. "Not again." As dawn crept over the horizon, the village remained divided, some clinging fiercely to their secrets, others trembling at the cost of truth. Ilara knew the lines had been drawn, and the coming days would test her resolve in ways she had never anticipated. Outside, the fog thickened once more, swallowing Eldermore's streets and secrets alike, a silent witness to the fractures forming within. With every step forward, Ilara felt the shadow of the ledger grow heavier, and the stakes of her investigation more perilous. The village's fragile peace teetered on the edge of collapse, and the choice between exposing the truth or preserving the silence loomed impossibly large. But Ilara was no stranger to impossible choices, and she would face this one, no matter the cost. The night settled again, but in Eldermore, the calm was only a prelude to the storm gathering beneath the fog.